For some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. And for the next 3 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online, and on digital radio. I'll keep you up to date on all the biggest news stories of the day, including Prince Harry back in the royal fold. The Duke of Sussex gave his first public interview since his father, King Charles, was diagnosed with cancer last week. It's now fueled speculation that he could begin to repair relations with his dad and brother, but crucially, take up a temporary role undertaking royal duties again. So, could we be seeing Harry becoming a working royal again? Then, some might have thought that support for these so-called hate marchers would have waned by now, but today we're in the 4th consecutive month. Thousands of pro-Palestine supporters are marching in central London today, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We'll be there live shortly. And this is unbelievable. A judge has ruled that former US President Donald Trump must pay nearly £281 million to New York State for lying about the values of his properties. He says he's been stitched up. And by the way, that Trump story is insane. Even the banks who gave Donald Trump those multi-million-dollar loans said that the underwriting process was fine, they had no problem with it. And of course, Prince Harry, breaking story this morning, is he going to be back in the royal fold just 4 years after ditching the royals for a new life in California? Let me know all your thoughts on all the stories we'll be discussing today. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, or message me on socials. We're at GBNews on Twitter, Instagram, and all the rest of it. But first, here's your morning news headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Ben. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. Foreign ministers from the G7 have held a minute's silence in Munich for Alexei Navalny after a spokesperson confirmed his death in prison. It comes as Lord Cameron warned of consequences for Russia this morning, as vigils and protests were held across the world in support of Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic. Crowds gathered outside the Russian embassy in London, laying tributes and demanding the Russian president be held accountable for his death. The Foreign Office summoned Russian diplomats last night, though the ambassador was reportedly too ill to attend, with a deputy sent instead. Those gathered at the Munich Security Conference voiced their fury, with officials from the US, EU and NATO laying blame on Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the conference the Russian leader is a thug who must be stopped.
After the murder of Alexei Navalny, it's absurd to perceive Putin as a supposedly legitimate head of a Russian state. And he is a thug who maintains power through corruption and violence, coming to his so-called inauguration, shaking his hand, considering him an equal means to disdain the very nature of political power.
Meanwhile, the reaction across Russian-controlled media to Alexei Navalny's death has been minimal, with scant detail and little context about who he was. But it's attracted more attention online, trending on some social media platforms. People were cautioned against taking part in mass gatherings, though, with police detaining more than 100 protesters. Officers have been seen this morning removing floral tributes to Mr. Navalny, ensuring there's little evidence that the support that he might have had. Marina Litvinenko is the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, a former Russian spy who was poisoned in London. She told GB News that the world must consider whether Vladimir Putin can be allowed to continue his brutal regime.
Do you accept Putin as the leader of the country? Do you believe you can negotiate with this regime? Do you believe you can trust? And this is a very important, and I think we will have not another chance to make any change for what is happening now to Russia and what is happening to Ukraine.
In other news, a third of small boat arrivals since 2018 have taken place while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. That's according to new analysis by the Labour Party. That's after 52 people reportedly crossed the Channel by small boat yesterday, meaning there's been just over 38,500 arrivals since Mr Sunak became Prime Minister. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said it was proof the government's focus on its Rwanda plan isn't enough to solve the crisis. The government insists its policies are working, with the number of crossings last year down more than a third compared to a year earlier. Farmers in Kent are staging a protest at a Tesco supermarket, furious at what they say are cheap international imports. Around 20 tractors are parked at Tesco Extra in Whitfield, near Dover. They're aiming to raise awareness to what they fear could be a threat to Britain's food security because of the unfair treatment of farmers by large retailers. They say they can't compete with cheap foreign imports, and unless something is done, British farmers won't be able to afford to feed the British public. Donald Trump has been ordered to pay $354.9 million in penalties for fraudulently inflating his net worth to dupe lenders. He's also been banned from running any business in New York for 3 years. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and called the case a political vendetta. The latest case comes as the former president appears to be cruising to a Republican nomination despite multiple other legal battles. And the Duke of Sussex is reportedly willing to step into a temporary royal role while his father undergoes cancer treatment. According to reports in The Times, Harry is said to have told friends he'd be willing to cover some duties while his father recovers. It comes after Prince Harry hinted at a possible reconciliation with his father during an interview on American television. Speaking to Good Morning America programme, he said he was grateful for the time he spent with his father during a short visit to London last week. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Ben.
Thank you, Sophia. Should we get stuck into some of today's topics, not least that bloodbath in the pair of by-elections on Friday? So Sir Keir Starmer, he says that people are now ready to put their faith in a changed Labour Party following that double win in Wellingborough and Kingswood. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, he says the circumstances facing the Tories are challenging, you think, but insists Labour doesn't have a plan. Take a look at this.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan, because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Joining me now is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Good afternoon, Nigel. Thank you for joining us. Since Friday, Rishi Sunak's reminded me of, do you remember that man, Comical Ali, from the Gulf War, who was giving live TV broadcasts as the tanks rolled into Baghdad behind him, saying, everything's fine, the economy's turning a corner, it's great. Has he got a leg to stand on from here until the election, Nigel?
Well, it doesn't look very much like it, Ben, certainly. I mean, yes, he is a bit Comical Ali-like, that the idea that a low turnout means that there's no enthusiasm for Labour. It could be one of the reasons, but there are an awful lot of others. Simple complacency. In Kingswood, it was raining all afternoon while the vote was going on. And it could be that people actually are perfectly happy. Now, it doesn't seem like any of those things are really true. That the economy is not turning a corner. We're now in a recession, albeit a shallow one. So Rishi Sunak is right about he's got an awful lot of work to do if he thinks he's going to gain victory at the general election.
Nigel, there were some interesting stats in terms of the vote share from Wellingborough, for example. Labour actually only got 107 more votes than they did in 2019. Meanwhile, the Tories lost about 24,000. So that suggests it's not the fact that Labour are surging and there's some newfound popularity amongst Starmer's ranks. In actual fact, it's just complete disillusionment with Rishi Sunak and his party.
Well, certainly, I think that's the main reason that people are just fed up with the Tories, and these kind of results show that. It just bears out what opinion polls are doing at the moment. I mean, the interesting thing in both by-elections was really how well Reform did. That certainly in Wellingborough, Ben Habib got 13%. Now, that's about the same amount that UKIP was polling back in 2015. Although you have to bear in mind that UKIP only got one MP out of that general election, despite doing very well with the popular vote.
4 million votes in 2015 for UKIP. Yeah. And actually, Nigel Farage, even today, he says that he still feels very bitter about that. But do you know what, Nigel? I think with Reform, they haven't said this publicly, but I don't think of course they'd want to win seats, but they know in this system they're not going to win seats. But I think really their aim is toppling the Tories and just completely annihilating them.
Yes, and they could well do that. I mean, I think it's a bit optimistic, the Reform spin that had they not been standing in Kingswood, the Tories would have won. That assumes that everybody who voted Reform was actually a straight Tory switcher, which I don't think is very likely. So on the basis of that, Reform can do some damage, and certainly Tory MPs in marginal seats, especially in the Red Wall, will be very concerned about these results.
Just briefly, Nigel, what do you make of this piece in the Telegraph last night from Rishi Sunak, basically calling on what he called British Conservatives to unite and beat Keir Starmer? He didn't mention Reform by name, but it pretty much calls for Reform to step down. That's as far as I've perceived it anyway.
Yeah, it's that, and also the fact that he's got problems with his own right wing. You've got 5 factionalised Tory groups as well that have formed themselves. So, yeah, what he needs is a united party, and he desperately needs people who veer towards the right to vote for him. It just doesn't seem to be happening.
So what is the key I know the answer to this, I think, but what is the key policy for Sunak to adopt now? What's the change of course that Lord David Frost, for example, has been calling for this morning? What does the Prime Minister need to do to save himself?
In the Red Wall, it's immigration, quite clearly, which means that he's got to get a flight off to Rwanda before the general election. That looks unlikely. The top issue overall in the country is the cost of living crisis. He's still got to deal with that. And the next thing is to get NHS waiting lists down. OK, great stuff. Nigel Nelson, in your very well-stocked home library, I take it. No surprise you're so well-informed these days. Thank you for your time. Very much appreciated. Have a good weekend. Now, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, go to the website, gbnews.com, and also check out our socials too. By the way, this is our election year, of course. General elections all over the shop, 40 different countries, and GB News will be hot on the pulse all throughout the next 7-8 months. Let's move on and change gear now, shall we? Yesterday, Prince Harry gave his first public interview since his father, the King Charles, was diagnosed with cancer last week. This is what he had to tell Good Morning America about the effect of his father's illness had on his own family.
How did you get the news that the King was ill?
I spoke to him.
And what did you do next?
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
What's sort of your outlook on his health?
That stays between me and him.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family. Absolutely. Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together.
Just physically being in California, how have you process the fact that there's so much happening back with your family where you come from?
I have my own family,
right?
So as we all do, right? So, my family and my life in California is as it is. I've got other trips planned that would take me through the UK or back to the UK. So, I'll stop in and see my family as much as I can.
Now, we've already had a few emails on this. The inbox is going wild, and I'll bring you those messages in a second. But the interview that Harry did with Good Morning America has fueled speculation that he could begin to repair relations with his father and brother William, which, of course, have become very strained since he and Meghan stepped back from their duties as working royals. But could we see the Duke becoming a working royal again? Joining me now is former UKIP leader Henry Bolton and former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Henry, I see you've come with your Charles tie today. Was that a coincidence?
Well, it was total coincidence. In fact, I didn't know that we were going to discuss this particular topic.
We should have got you on the by-elections, really, but as you're wearing the Charles tie, what do you reckon about these reports this morning that Harry may come back into the royal fold as a working royal, albeit temporarily?
I think there's a very, very long journey for him to travel before he would be able to become a working member of the royal family again. I mean, even if you think about making him an honorary colonel of a regiment in the British Army, something like that, then actually are the soldiers in that regiment going to think, well, hang on a minute, we've been palmed off with Harry here, we don't really... I mean, there's all sorts of issues. I think, I trust the King. I think he's a wise statesman and he has been around the houses when it comes to this sort of thing. Certainly he might be out of touch on some things, it's a matter of opinion. But on this, he knows his family, he knows the issues, and in a sense, it's not for us to judge whether or not, if ever, there is a time for Harry to sort of move back into the working side of it.
But that said, Henry, the late Queen said that Harry and Meghan couldn't be half in, half out. She wouldn't have wanted what is being proposed or mooted this morning.
There is nothing now. At the present time, the answer is no. Harry has spent many years undermining his position as a working member of the royal family. It would take him 2 or 3 times as many years, I would suggest, to be able to regain the trust of the British people and indeed of the King, and perhaps his brother as well, to be able to come back. I think it's a very, very distant and faint possibility. I don't think it's on the cards, and I certainly wouldn't support it at this time. I think it would be a very risky and dangerous move at a time when the royal family, anyway, is dealing with a period of change.
Well, the problem is he just can't seem to keep his mouth shut. He came
he can't. If I was the King, I wouldn't bring him back.
Ben, I think you had a wonderful, brilliant visual metaphor just now. You had Prince Harry hurtling downhill at great speed on that one. And he's now wandering around. He's like one of those London taxis with a for hire sign flashing. He's saying, I'd be happy to come back and help if I'm needed. Like, I'm free. I'm sorry. If the King wants Prince Harry to step in, he will ask him. Prince Harry doesn't need to go around with a sandwich board saying, I'm for hire.
What do you make of the fact he's done this interview, basically gobbing off to American breakfast TV? This morning, a lot of people have said, actually, I got it wrong. I thought Harry was going to spill the beans, but he was quite reserved in his comments. But my argument is that he would have known beforehand that they would have asked that question.
100%.
And if he really cared, he could have just said, guys, don't ask me about my dad's health.
100%, and he could have done that, and they would have had to have respected that. But what was fascinating about that was when they said to him, have you thought about being an American citizen? I don't know if he's aware that under the American Constitution, if you become a citizen of the United States, you have to renounce all your titles. Now, that's going to be a bit...
Well, that would leave him skinned, wouldn't it? He wouldn't want to do that.
Well, I think Meghan might tell Harry, no! She might have something to say about it.
Do you see Harry as British still?
Do you know, I don't, in a funny sort of way. I think he's transatlantic. At the moment, to quote the late Her Majesty, it's the half in, half out.
Sorry, Steve, I agree.
We can't agree, Henry.
No, I know. We're supposed to fight and argue on this programme, aren't we?
Outside, car park.
When Harry first started to get, cause waves, and I think Meghan's got a huge amount of answering to do in that respect. But I said, I hope they go off to America, have a family, live a happy, quiet life.
Be a great success,
and do their thing, but separate themselves from the public life of the royal family in the United Kingdom. And they failed to do that.
Well,
they consistently tried to re-engage and milk
Edward VIII, as you know, after he abdicated, he went off to govern Bermuda, and then he went and lived in Paris. He never set foot back in this country.
Chaps, can I play devil's advocate and
that's
say...
That's your job, Ben.
Of course. That's what
we haven't argued yet, you see.
Harry has said, and many other people have said, that, at times of of serious illness or concerning illness, as we've seen with the King, that it's right that people, you know, if there's going to be any positives from that kind of scenario, it's that it's a unifier for family relations, and it's a good opportunity to heal rifts and whatnot. Is it not right that Harry has come back and is opening now?
No, I would say quite
dialogue.
the opposite. A period of silence on his part would be greatly, greatly welcomed. You're absolutely right. In times of family crisis, the family gathers round the bed. We all know that. But in this particular case, he's not adding anything. And quite honestly, I don't know the mind of King Charles. You know, I only met him once or twice. We didn't have these deep discussions.
What's he like as a man, the King?
He was a bit stilted when I met him, but on the other hand, you know, hello, you're from Ealing, aren't you? Very good comedies, he said to me. But look, no, he meets thousands of people, millions of people. But look, I really doubt that he actually is longing and hoping for Prince Harry to make this move.
I think it would have been far more tasteful if we'd heard afterwards that Harry had come over. That's maybe difficult. But also, remember that Prince Harry wasn't making life any easier for the Queen when the Duke of Edinburgh was ill, and in fact he didn't exactly cover himself in glory when the Queen herself was.
Well, that's a very good point.
So
actually.
Now it's a bit difficult for him to say, yes, you know, I'd like this reconciliation. Maybe he's learning a lesson. Maybe as he's growing in maturity, he's starting to realise the error of his ways. But as I say, it's going to take him many, many, many years and a lot of effort to regain the trust, probably of his own family, but also of the British people. And he can't come back into a public role in the royal family until he has done that. And as King, I would keep him well away.
The same thing would apply to Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew's obviously saying that he'd quite like to come back, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, you make quite a good point there about all the times that he's kind of, you know, some would call it betraying his family. Even recently, when Harry and Meghan went to Jamaica to cavort with the Prime Minister...
who's an avowed anti-monarchist, who actually wants to leave the Commonwealth.
At a time, by the way, they did that trip at a time when Kate was the Princess of Wales was in hospital for
serious abdominal,
and Charles was having that first visit for the prostate situation.
No, that's appalling. It looked dreadful, and you'd think they'd actually use their heads, but it's almost like that they're anywhere they'll go. If somebody's opening a fridge door, they'll be there at the moment. It's
of course, they're not here to defend themselves, and they said at the time that they were going for a Bob Marley. I think it was Bob Marley.
It was the first night of the film.
But they should surely. I mean, unless they are really far more stupid than I think even they are, surely they know the impact this is having, the effect it's happening, how it looks. You know, I can't believe that it's anything but a conscious decision to ignore the negative impact. And why would that be? One can only speculate. I'm not inside their heads, I'm not inside their circle, but I think, like most people, it's probably because they want the publicity.
Well, let's give him one bit of credit. He fought heroically for this country. He was in the line of fire. He did that, which not many of us have.
Stephen.
But also, I have to say, Henry, the Invictus Games, which is paying tribute to disabled ex-servicemen and women, is a brilliant piece of work. And you know, can't he concentrate on that and leave the idea of him becoming?
I agree, but with regards to Afghanistan, he you know, talking about the number of people he killed and this sort of thing. I mean, I'm ex-military, you're ex-military. You know, I was in Afghanistan for 2.5 months. You don't talk about that sort of thing unless either you know, you're bigging yourself up, or and it's probably at least partly false.
It made a great chapter of his book, didn't it?
Well, that's the point, isn't it?
Henry Bolton, Stephen Pound, thank you so much. Insightful as ever.
From the devil's advocate, that's great.
The expert. You're watching, listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. Lots more coming up on today's show, including Donald Trump's $350 million court fine. Plus, while the UK slips into a, so-called technical recession this week, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt reckons the news isn't as bad as it seems. And you're not going to want to miss this new clip from Rishi Sunak explaining like a school teacher why you're all skinned. All of that and more to come. You're watching, listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Marnie says being sexy in business is entirely possible and maybe even better.
Well, Marnie, this is something I say is true. I've had to live with this for quite a long time. And I think you can. I think you can do both. Now, tell me, it's lovely to see you first of all.
Thank you for having me.
In all your gorgeousness. And you're telling me that that often is regarded as something derogatory or something to hold you back. Is that right?
It's just this really unfair thing, this really unfair narrative that women can't do both. Even men can do it, as you know, Eamon. You can do it. You can do it all. And I just think, you know, women are so multifaceted. They can be mothers, they can be sexy, they can be businesswomen, they can be silly, they can be all these different dimensions. And this press push that we have to limit ourselves to one category, it's just unfair.
But do you think that is where some people may be wrong-footed or go wrong, to underestimate you?
Exactly. There is that saying, disarm with charm. So, you know, that there is that idea that people do look at someone who cares about how they look, who's perhaps a bit feminine, and underestimate them. But hopefully I proved that wasn't the case in the boardroom.
And thank goodness for Karen Brady. She's definitely upped the glam stakes on the show. And if anybody can prove that you can be sexy and successful in business, I suppose it's her, really. But where do you think most of the criticism comes from? Because I have to say, hard to believe, but when I was younger, I certainly got a bit of this at my old employer, being told that I had to dress a certain way, not to be too sexy, which I found hugely
And we just point out, you were told this by women.
I was told this by a female boss who didn't like me wearing zips on the back of my dress. Not just me, but some of the other presenters there. And I took such offence. I felt like she thought that I was some sort of, I don't know what. Do you take offence when people are criticising you, that, you know, in some way they think you're, I don't know?
There's just no right answer. And as we said, I think Karen Brady is doing an excellent job at leading the charge that you can be glamorous and get the job done.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're with Ben Leo on GB News Saturday here on GB News. We're going to dive deep into the economy now. Despite pledges from Rishi Sunak to save the economy, this week the UK entered what's called a technical recession after a dismal latest set of GDP figures. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says despite this, the economy is, quote, turning a corner. But official figures show it shrank by 0.3% at the end of last year, following a period of decline in the previous 3 months, the definition, of course, of a recession. It's the first time the UK's GDP has dropped since the first half of 2020 after the first COVID lockdown. And Mr Hunt insists there's light at the end of the tunnel. Here's what he had to say.
We always expected growth to be weaker while we prioritised tackling inflation. That means higher interest rates. And that's the right thing to do, because you can't have long-term healthy growth with high inflation, but also for families. When there's a cost of living crisis, when the cost of their weekly shop is going up, their energy bills are much higher, it's the right thing to do. The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted. Inflation is coming down. Real wages have been going up now for 6 months. And if we stick to our guns, independent forecasters say that by the early summer we could start to see interest rates falling.
Cool. Hunt's Duller's dishwater, isn't he? Joining me now is economist and co-founder of Investment Advisors. You can hear him laughing in the background. Regionally, Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Justin, let's be frank. The Tories need to go for growth, and wasn't Liz Truss right?
What she's saying was right. It's how she went about it that was wrong. Of course we're going to have growth. You haven't got a growing economy, you're going to have serious trouble indeed. But, of course, remember, there's also globality at the moment. All you go into Europe, you'll find economies, they're very, very flat. Frankly, whether you're doing up 1.1 or 0.3 or down, they get revised in 3 months' time anyway, and they're nearly always different. So what you can do is longer-term trend, and it's lower, slower growth. What they need to do now is get the one word that runs an economy, confidence. Let the confidence in. Say, where is the growth occurring? And I know where it's growing. You can see it. It's around mostly technology companies, around those hubs you'll find, Silicon Roundabout, Silicon Glen, Fen, call it what you like. And these are high-tech internet businesses, often get bought up by overseas because we don't fund them properly. So we're good at technology, we're good at actually starting businesses, we're rotten at actually growing.
Can I just raise one point with you from these GDP figures? Yeah. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it blows apart the age-old wives' tale that immigration is beneficial to the economy because GDP per head contracted by 0.7%. That's despite net migration figures of, 745,000 in 2022, 672,000 in the 12 months to June last year. A city the size of Birmingham every 2 years, yet GDP per head is contracting.
Yep. And what you're also seeing with this is a number of people who, after the pandemic, didn't go back to work again. They've decided, for whatever reason, that's it, we're opting out of it.
They got a taste of the good life.
Well, we've got exactly here. This is where you need to incentivise those people to get back in and to start participating. If people are working, they're paying tax. They're paying tax, the government's happier. You've got to actually boost the economy, not by tax cuts, get the incentives there so people can invest in businesses and they get, we'll get tax benefits on it. We've got something like that now, the Enterprise Investment Scheme, but it's quite small. Now do that on a regional basis. There's no shortage of money. Therefore, you're actually then regionally, you're going to get more investment, create more jobs, and whether they're immigrants or domestic, well, frankly, the domestic guys and girls already there, get them trained into those areas.
So just in layman's terms, Justin, why no tax cuts for growth?
Tax cuts don't really have much of an impact because what you find, if you've got the wealthy people get a tax cut, they're probably going to save it. Actually, if it's going to be at the lower end of the scale, guarantee that they will actually go out and spend it because they need to. No, what you need to do is get the confidence back in there so businesses are attracting more investment. Attract more investment, then funnily enough, actually business will, further business from overseas comes in. So you get that idea that people are feeling, actually, it's not quite as bad as we thought it was. Yeah. Yes, the figures are not that encouraging. But actually, underlying all of this, there are growth areas. Focus on those. Tax cuts to the wealthy, well, it may sound like a good highlight, but it doesn't help the economy.
Can I just get your thoughts on this clip that Rishi Sunak put out some days ago? It was explaining to people about why we had inflation, why the economy is doing quite badly. And we're just trying to get it now. So I don't know if you saw it, but it was Sunak at a whiteboard, being very patronising, if I may say so myself. A massive circle saying, let's take a look. We've got the clip now.
Hi, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in the economy and the plan that we're working towards. But before then, I wanted to take you back to the context that we found ourselves in. We all remember COVID and the enormous impact it had on all of us. And because of that, we did a lot of things to get the country through COVID, like supporting the NHS, vaccine programme, furlough. Those things cost around £400 billion with all the other support we provided. And just as we were recovering from COVID, we saw a war when Russia invaded Ukraine. That meant that everyone's energy bills went up. But all of these things meant that we saw high inflation, and that's what caused all the pressures with the cost of living.
So he's been accused of gaslighting the public with that clip. And also, I have a question as well for you, the expert. He doesn't mention quantitative easing, printing money like it's going out of fashion. The US, of course, printed a third of their entire money supply in just, about a year, 12 months? Is he gaslighting the public?
Well, I mean, he's making up excuses that you actually say, where are the problems here? And he's trying to come up with a simple idea as to how we can try and control it. This is a global issue as much as anything else. What we saw with inflation coming was not consumer demand. The old British form of inflation would be people are spending too much, and they ended up putting up rates. The Bank of England put up rates for something they can't control. Just putting up interest rates does not affect the supply chain coming out of China. And because we were in a position where the supply routes were so taut that one tanker getting stuck in the Suez Canal and the whole thing stops.
Should the Bank of England have put up rates harder and faster?
It should have put rates up ages ago to a long-term level. But because remember, these were emergency rates that came in when we had the banking crisis. What they should be doing now is telling us the rates are going to be coming down, inflation's coming down, and therefore in a position to actually give them some good news for the future. You're going to be feeling better off in due course.
All right.
That doesn't give us it.
Well, in Rishi's defence, he has, inflation has halved. Whether that's down to him or just a global effect remains to be seen. But he has got a tick next to that. One of those 5 pledges. Justin Eckhart-Stewart, economist and co-founder of Investment Advisors regionally. Thank you so much for your time. Let's get the news with Sophia. Stay with us.
Thanks, Ben, from the GB newsroom at 12:30. Your headlines. Foreign ministers from the G7 have held a minute's silence in Munich for Alexei Navalny as a spokesperson says his cause of death has not yet been confirmed. It comes as Lord Cameron warned of consequences for Russia this morning as visuals and protests were held across the world in support of Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic. Crowds gathered outside the Russian embassy in London, laying tributes and demanding the Russian president be held accountable for his death. The Foreign Office summoned Russian diplomats last night, though the ambassador was reportedly too ill to attend, with a deputy sent instead. Those gathered at the Munich Security Conference voiced their fury, with officials from the US, EU and NATO laying blame on Putin, while the Ukrainian president called for more international assistance for his country's war with Moscow. In other news, a third of small boat arrivals since 2018 have taken place while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. That's according to new analysis by the Labour Party. They say it's proof the government's focus on the Rwanda plan isn't enough to solve the crisis. The government insists its policies are working, with the number of crossings last year down more a third compared to a year earlier. And farmers in Kent are staging a protest at a Tesco supermarket, furious at what they say are cheap international imports. Around 20 tractors are parked at Tesco Extra in Whitfield near Dover. They're aiming to raise awareness of what they fear could be a threat to Britain's food security. They say they can't compete with cheap foreign imports, and unless something is done, British farmers won't be able to afford to feed the British public. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Ben.
Thanks, Sophia. Now, remember, you guys at home, you can get in touch about all of the topics we've been discussing today by emailing me, gbviews@gbnews.com, or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. I quite keenly want to get your thoughts on Prince Harry potentially coming back into the royal fold. Less than 4 years, of course, after he did a runner with Meghan to California. And, of course, Donald Trump's massive fine in America. Has the justice system over there been politicised? That massive fine for allegedly defrauding the banks when the banks basically said that he had no case to answer. Elsewhere, coming up on today's show, we'll be live on the ground. Thousands of pro-Palestine supporters are marching in central London, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We'll be there live. All of that and more to come. I'm Ben Leo, and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. You know, I live there; it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place. And to walk away from that is really quite. It's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had 2 run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online, there's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday. You're with me, Ben Leo, on TV, online and digital radio. Should we get stuck into some of your emails? John says, Labour have said they will not have a cap on the number of people who can apply for asylum if they get in power. People who enter this country illegally are getting put up in hostels or brand new apartment blocks, and houses are being bought for them ahead of British families. I think you're referring to, John, that story from the other day about the Home Office snapping up 16,000 homes to house some 60,000 asylum seekers, despite around 4 million Brits needing homes. James says, Harry and Meghan will never be accepted back as part of the UK royal family by myself or the majority of my friends and most of the patriotic people in the UK. Since leaving the royal family and the UK, they've done nothing to promote or help this country. I no longer recognise him as Prince of the UK, oh, it's pretty strong, or the royal family. It's hard to disagree there, James. We've had years and years of constant slanging, so, yeah. You have to judge people by their content of their character and not what they say. Should we get stuck into these pro-Palestine protests? Suella Braverman, of course, some weeks ago called them hate marches. But there's one taking place again in London today, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Protesters, as we speak, are filling the streets of the capital, waving Palestinian flags and holding placards calling for Palestinian freedom and an end to the war in Gaza. And I might add, by the way, you're probably going to find one or two idiots waving pro-Hamas or pro-Houthi rebel placards or flags as well. Joining me now is GB News reporter Will Hollis, who's on the ground in London. Will, good afternoon, my friend. What's going on?
Well, there's expected to be hundreds of thousands of people here joining this march today. It's the 9th global day of action. Global because this kind of a march is happening across the entire world, not just happening here in the capital city, London. And where we are right now is just on the edge of Hyde Park. And you can see in the background that there are literally hundreds, thousands of people passing us right now. And this is just one small section of a very long parade that is snaking down towards the Israeli embassy. Now, this has been organised by the Stop the War Coalition and also the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Now, why is it important that they're heading towards the Israeli embassy? Well, they're calling for an immediate ceasefire, and they've been doing so every month or so since those attacks took place on the 7th of October, where around 1,200 people were killed in Israel by Hamas. Since then, though, 28,000 people have been killed in the conflict since, most of them Palestinian women and children, as Israel goes into Gaza Strip, trying to, as they would say, wipe out Hamas, because they say that you can't have peace without wiping out Hamas. So what you can see right now in front of us is a sea of Palestinian flags, red, black, white and green, and they're heading down Park Lane right now. What you'll also be able to see is a lot of yellow jackets, because that's the police. Now, the commander of this particular protest, the Met Police officer in charge, says that the conflict in the Middle East continues to have a polarising and profound effect on the capital city. There are 1,500 police patrolling the streets of the capital today, and that includes for things like football. But the commander says that there is a lot of them that are working specifically on this protest. Now, as you said, Ben, in the intro, what they're mainly looking for is anything that incites hatred, anything that incites incites racism or glorifies the proscribed terrorist organisation, which is Hamas. This week we saw that go to the court. Those 3 people convicted of terror charges for displaying paragliders on their bodies as well on placards. So they've actually been giving out flyers to tell people what is within the law and what isn't. They said you can have a voice, you can protest, you can let people know what you think, but you can't incite racism or hatred. Now, why is this all particularly important this week, Ben? Well, in Parliament we're going to be seeing another vote on a ceasefire as the SNP puts forward that motion, and a lot of eyes will be on Keir Starmer and whether he'll be telling his MPs to abstain in that vote.
Bill Hollis on the ground in London, thanks very much. It's almost like a lottery every Saturday afternoon, isn't it? How many people are going to be nicked or, pulled up for spewing hateful rhetoric? Let's go to Scotland, where our Scottish reporter Tony Maguire is reporting on the pro-Palestine march up there. Is it the case that that march is going to end up, or at least pass, the Scottish Labour conference, Tony?
Yes, good afternoon. That is indeed the case. I'm here at the Scottish Events Centre on the Clyde side of Glasgow, and this is where the march is headed. From about 1 o'clock this afternoon, Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign protesters are going to march from the centre of Glasgow here to the Clyde side, where the Scottish Labour conference has been happening. Now, yesterday, Anas Sarwar, Scottish Labour leader, he gave a rousing 70-minute speech in which he called again for an immediate ceasefire, and he urged everybody to be able to separate the people of Gaza as well from Hamas, as well as the people of Israel from Benjamin Netanyahu's government, which he said neither of those groups want peace whatsoever. Now, here at Scottish Labour Conference today, a motion was passed that would support a ceasefire and the vote, and certainly SNP were out early this morning campaigning for Scottish Labour to whip essentially the 2 Labour MPs north of the border here in that vote when it hits the Commons next week. Now, we're still a little while away from seeing the protest arrive here at the SEC. At the minute, the loudest group, and unfortunately, is the groups heading into the wedding show, which is happening behind me. But needless to say, a large Police Scotland presence here to make sure that no civilians or any of the delegates of the Labour Party are caught in any kind of altercations. So far, peaceful here, but it's early days in Glasgow.
Tony Maguire in Scotland, thanks very much. It's a great advert, isn't it, for London? Come to London, come shopping down Oxford Street, or come and enjoy yourself somewhere down Regent Street and fill your boots. But maybe not. There's thousands of people waving Palestinian flags and, as I said, some supporting the Houthis or Hamas in the process. Right, this is GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. Lots more coming up on today's show, including French striker and wonderkid Kylian Mbappe. He says he wants to leave Paris Saint-Germain this summer, but will we see the World Cup winner in the Premier League, hopefully at Arsenal? All of that and more to come. You're watching, listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Or they're trying to make it better, or they're trying to make it slower, a lot slower. Slower enough, in fact, for it to sufficiently allow the boats to start coming in to cause further political damage to Rishi Sunak.
Which it will do if it carries on.
Of course it will. And this is the Labour peers, the Lib Dem peers, and no doubt some of the Conservative wets, banding together, causing political damage to Rishi Sunak. And the longer it goes on, the worse it will be for the Conservative Party.
There's now a deadline on the Rwanda plan. It's got to start working this summer to have any electoral benefit for Rishi Sunak, because of course if the election is in November, by then the crossings will slow down. It's got to be up and running by about May or June, and then they'll take it from there.
Cool. And you have a crumb of comfort for us. Rishi Sunak met a Prime Minister.
Well, a crumb of comfort for those who want to stop the boat, certainly, or we'll get towards it. The PM today met Alexander De Croo, who's a Belgian Prime Minister. They've agreed a UK-Belgium law enforcement cooperation agreement.
In short, that is a focus on surveillance and information, ultimately, which should help stop the boats. Not many boats make crossings from Belgium, but it's the kind of they can hopefully use law enforcement. These are the kind of deals which Sir Keir Starmer's talking about. If he becomes Prime Minister, he'll do more of these deals with countries on the continent, and this shows that the PM, the Tory PM, can do them too.
And there may be intelligence sharing of crime gangs that operate within Belgium. As you say, it's a much, much further distance, much more perilous across the North Sea. Very unlikely that people will be leaving in any great numbers from Belgium. But nevertheless, is this of note, or is it a token victory against the backdrop of domestic loss?
It's interesting they can do it with Belgium and not do it with the European Union, because so far we've been told the returns agreements can't be agreed with individual countries because they've got the European Union to talk to. Maybe this deal can be mirrored with France, and that might help with better cooperation, because basically after Brexit we're a sovereign country. We have to work on some areas more closely with our European neighbours.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo, on your TV, online and digital radio. Let's get stuck into some sport, shall we? And no better to do that with than resident sport expert Aidan McGee.
Good to see you, Ben.
How are you? I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
I'm hoping you're going to bring me some good news about Kylian Mbappe signing for Arsenal.
Well, it was interesting because Mikel Arteta was speaking about it this week, wasn't he, Ben? And he didn't close the door on a potential for a bid. Now, I think it's very much kind of... He's got nothing to lose by linking Arsenal with the player, because if he says, well, we're not interested, we don't want to be part of the conversation, it says, well, where are you going to get a striker from then? Because everyone knows Arsenal need a striker. If they had one this season, I think they'd be 5 or 6 points clear in the Premier League title race. But realistically, if I was a betting man, I'd say they're probably about 10 to 1 to get it. I think odds-on favourites have to be Real Madrid, partly because they're the only ones with a balmy enough wage structure to even contemplate the kind of numbers. Yes, he's going to be a free transfer because it's the end of his contract, but the signing-on fee alone could be in excess of £1 million. Sorry, the signing-on fee alone could be in excess of £130 million, while the wages could be around £1.1 million per week.
A week?
A week.
$1 million a week.
That's more than you get here.
There is on our... Oh, yeah, right. There is on our screens now.
Yes.
Well, that's Messi there, but there it is.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Explain why he's so good. Is he still the best player in the world for those who maybe don't follow football so much?
I don't... Best player in the world, to me, can rarely be a striker because it's not a position where you show the full range of footballing abilities. When we think of the greats, we think of midfielders, playmakers, Platini, Zidane, anyone else you can think of who played in that, Diego Maradona, for example. Weren't really out-and-out strikers. However, he won the World Cup at 18 in Russia with France in 2018, but I don't really think you can be considered the best player in the world, irrespective of your position, if you've only played your league football in France. It's probably the third or fourth best league in Europe. To really prove your mettle and really show that you've done it, you need to do what Messi and Ronaldo have done. You need to have played in either the Premier League in England or in Spain, or preferably both.
Ronaldo, by the way, is my favourite ever player. Messi v Ronaldo. Ronaldo every day of the week. Messi's more gifted. He's got God's gift.
You mean R9?
Yeah.
OK, fine. Yeah. I saw him play.
So yeah, that's fine. £1 million a week, though. I mean, is that going to be a World Cup?
It could be more. Well, we don't necessarily know, because often when we talk about wages, it's often a guesstimate game by journalists. I mean, it's not. The reality is that the details of contracts, especially when they make the club bad or look a little bit profligate, you don't really get an accurate number. But yeah, I mean, it will certainly be up there, no question about it.
OK, well, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but let's hope.
He said we want to be part of the conversation, but I think. I think you can say that when you know that the player's going to Real Madrid.
Yeah, sure. OK, should we move on to Chris Hoy?
Yes.
He's got he's come out and said that he's he's fighting cancer. He hasn't been too specific on what, though, has he?
No, he's been quite circumspect about that. He didn't say what exactly the type of cancer it was, which makes it difficult even for an amateur sleuth to make any estimations as to what the prognosis might be. But he's undergone chemotherapy. Rather chillingly, he said, "For the sake of my young family, I had hoped to keep this information private, but regrettably, our hand has been forced. While I'm thankful for any support, I'd like to deal with this privately." So it suggests to me that someone was on the verge of revealing the news, and he felt he had to jump the gun to tell everyone about it. And so he was diagnosed last year. As I say, chemotherapy is going to be very invasive, but he did say he'd be hopeful of doing some commentary duty for the Paris Olympics in the summer.
I read that little note about his hand being forced, and it would suggest that maybe a newspaper or someone that was thinking of running the story. But I've worked in newspapers for 8 years. I was at the Sun for.
Likewise, yeah.
So they can't just print stories about people's health.
No, it needs to be.
Maybe they used to 20 years ago. They can't anymore. They don't.
Yeah, look, I mean, we don't know. You're right. I mean, I don't know. He could be talking about something else. He's not actually specifically said in his papers. But no, I mean, it could be a rogue account on social media or something like that. We know. We just don't know. But he was talking about privacy, and but you know, listen, he was quite upbeat about it. He said the chemotherapy is going well. He said it's an exciting year of work ahead, not least with the Paris Olympics in July. I can't wait to get stuck in, have fun, and share it all with you. And he said he's surrounded with love, and we'd all love to be in that position.
And it just goes to show, no matter who you are, you know, Sir Chris Hoy, a great Olympian, probably still fit as a fiddle.
Oh, I mean, goodness me, look at the list. Look at the list of achievements here. I mean, you know, 1 silver in Sydney as part of a team event, 1 gold at Athens, 3 at Beijing, 2 at London 2012. I mean, the most successful track cyclist of all time, no doubt.
Just in 30 seconds, Roy Hodgson, Crystal Palace manager, he's been taken ill, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has actually. Well, he's on the verge of being sacked this weekend, so he's still in hospital as far as we know, undergoing tests. We're awaiting a statement from Crystal Palace. I think they'll say something later today. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult. He was going to get sacked. I mean, can they sack a club legend while he's lying there in hospital? It's a little bit unedifying, isn't it? And a little bit crass. But, you know, they've got a game at Everton on Monday. They may have to.
Are they away to Everton?
They are indeed, yeah.
And they haven't won in how many games?
They haven't won, I think it's 3 games, three wins in the last 19.
But likewise, Hodgson, you know, he's had a bad spell with Palace, but he's a great...
bad injuries. Bad injuries, though.
Former England manager, Inter Milan, he's a legend. But
absolutely. Maidstone United as well. Yeah. Played for Maidstone United.
Exactly, yeah. Top man, Aidan McGee, thank you so much for your expertise. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. 2 more hours still to come, you lucky people, including a judge has ruled that former US President Donald Trump must pay nearly £281 million to the New York state for lying about the values of his properties. He says he's been stitched up. It certainly looks like that. First, let's take a look at the weather with Craig.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead for the rest of this weekend, we will see a band of heavy rain move across the country. It's all courtesy of these weather fronts. They will just gradually spread their way eastward. But with winds coming in from the southwest, it is going to be a mild weekend for all of us. So this evening we can see the rain working its way in from the west, some heavy outbreaks of rain embedded in it. So we do have some warnings in force across parts of England and Wales. So there will be some fairly difficult driving conditions if you are travelling overnight tonight. But it will be a mild one. Temperatures for many staying in double figures across the south. And these temperatures really are where we should be during the course of the day, not the night time this time of year. So a bit of a slow start across southeastern England, still some heavy rain here, but it should dry up towards lunchtime. And for most of us, it will be a brighter day, the better day of the 2, but there will still be a few showery outbreaks of rain around, especially during the middle part of the day. But for all of us, a mild one. Temperatures in the south potentially reaching 15 or 16 degrees. Having a look at Monday, another spell of rain will move its way across the country. Either side, there will be some drier and brighter moments, and again, it will be feeling fairly mild for the time of year. Tuesday, Wednesday, again, remaining fairly changeable. Further spells of rain, especially during the middle of the week, but temperatures for all of us staying in double figures by day.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basic-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this
Yes?
training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah.
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon to you. Welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Ben Leo, and for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online, and digital radio. I'll keep you up to date on the stories that really matter to you, including, coming up this hour, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says people are now ready to put their faith in a changed Labour Party. That follows the double win in Wellingborough and Kingswood by-elections yesterday. But Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, says the Tories and Reform UK should unite to beat Starmer. We'll be debating if he's right fairly shortly. Then, some might have thought that support for these so-called hate marches would have waned by now, but they've been going on for 4 consecutive months. Thousands of pro-Palestine supporters are marching in central London today, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We'll be there live on the ground. And this one's got the inbox stirring as Prince Harry gives his first interview since seeing his father and his cancer diagnosis. He's hinted that the King's health battles could heal the rift within the royal family. So I'm asking today, are we heading for a blockbuster royal reconciliation? Thanks for being with me today. As I said, the inbox is going wild for these Prince Harry messages about his potential entry back into the royal family. Pat says, very bluntly, Pat, if Harry's welcome back, I would vote for a republic. Linda says, after all the awful things he said about the royal family, Harry should stay well away. He appears to have a very high opinion of himself. And Andy, on the Palestine protest, says, as much as I agree to the right to protest, these Palestinian supporters are no better than Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. Now remember, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today. Email me gbviews@gbnews.com, or of course message me on our socials. I'll be keeping a keen eye on them. But for now, here's the news with Sophia.
Thanks, Ben. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour: there'll be consequences for the death of Alexei Navalny. That was the warning from the Foreign Secretary as he met foreign ministers from the G7 in Munich today. They took part in a minute's silence after visuals and protests were held across the world in support of Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic. Lord Cameron's comments were backed by Sir Keir Starmer as crowds gathered outside the Russian embassy in London, laying tributes and demanding the Russian president be held accountable for his death. Those gathered at the Munich Security Conference voiced their fury, with officials from the US, EU and NATO laying blame on Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the conference the Russian leader is a thug who must be stopped.
After the murder of Alexei Navalny, it's absurd to perceive Putin as a supposedly legitimate head of a Russian state. And he is a thug who maintains power through corruption and violence, coming to his so-called inauguration, shaking his hand, considering him an equal means to disdain the very nature of political power.
Meanwhile, the reaction across Russian-controlled media to Alexei Navalny's death has been minimal, with scant detail and little context about who he was. But it's attracted more attention online, trending on some social media platforms. People were cautioned against taking part in mass gatherings, though, with police detaining at least 212 protesters. Officers were seen this morning removing floral tributes to Mr. Navalny, ensuring there's little evidence of the support he might have had. Marina Litvinenko is the widow of Alexander Litvinenko, a former Russian spy who was poisoned in London. She told GB News that the world must consider whether Vladimir Putin can be allowed to continue his brutal regime.
Do you accept Putin as the leader of the country? Do you believe you can negotiate with this regime? Do you believe you can trust? And this is a very important, and I think we will have not another chance to make any change for what is happening now to Russia and what is happening to Ukraine.
In other news, a third of small boat arrivals since 2018 have taken place while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. That's according to new analysis by the Labour Party. That's after 52 people reportedly crossed the Channel by small boat yesterday, meaning there's been just over 38,500 arrivals since Mr Sunak became Prime Minister. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said it was proof the government's focus on its Rwanda plan isn't enough to solve the crisis. The government insists its policies are working, with the number of crossings last year down more than a third compared to a year earlier. Farmers in Kent are staging a protest at a Tesco supermarket, furious at what they say are cheap international imports. Around 20 tractors are parked at Tesco Extra in Whitfield, near Dover. They're aiming to raise awareness to what they fear could be a threat to Britain's food security because of the unfair treatment of farmers by large retailers. They say they can't compete with the cheap foreign imports, and unless something is done, British farmers won't be able to afford the feed to the British public. Donald Trump has been ordered to pay $354.9 million in penalties for fraudulently inflating his net worth to dupe lenders. He's also been banned from running any business in New York for 3 years. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and called the case a political vendetta. This latest case comes as the former president appears to be cruising to the Republican nomination, despite multiple other legal battles. And the Duke of Sussex is reportedly willing to step into a temporary royal role while his father undergoes cancer treatment. According to reports in The Times, Harry is said to have told friends he's willing to cover some duties while his father recovers. It comes after Prince Harry hinted at possible reconciliations with his father during an interview on American television. Speaking to Good Morning America, he said he was grateful for the time he spent with his father during a short visit last week. For the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Ben.
Thanks, Sophia. Let's have another cracking hour, shall we? Starting with the by-election bloodbath for the Tories yesterday. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, he's reacted by saying that people are now ready to put their faith in a changed Labour Party following that double win in Wellingborough and Kingswood. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says that the circumstances facing the Tories are challenging, bit of an understatement, but insists Labour doesn't have a plan. Take a look at this.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan, and if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change, and when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
Right, OK. Joining me now is GB News reporter Adam Cherry. Adam, you're on the ground in Wellingborough. Actually, Rishi has a point there. He's saying that there's not a newfound enthusiasm for Labour. It's just that there's disillusionment with the Tories. In Wellingborough, Labour only got 107 more seats than they did in 2019. So he's right, isn't he?
Partially. That tells a part of the story, yes. Labour's vote in absolute terms stayed consistent with 2019. What happened was the Conservatives absolutely hemorrhaged votes all over the place, both to Reform, some to Labour and some to third parties, but also actually from people just sitting on their hands and refusing to vote at all. As you say, I've been here, this is my hometown, so it's nice to be back, but I've been speaking to people all day today and yesterday to find out in the aftermath of that, why did that happen? Why did they make the choices that they made in that election? And it seems to me that people are just so cynical and fed up that there's no point in voting for anyone at all, hence why Labour's vote stays the same. In fact, I'm going to show you a few clips of that right now. This is what the people of Wellingborough have been saying to me this morning in response to the result yesterday. Take a look at this.
To the Conservative mainly because the Conservative candidate actually lives in Wellingborough. I mean, that's pretty important, especially when you're deciding on policies that could affect Wellingborough. You want to be there to see the effects. And she lives in London. God, I particularly like London.
I'm very, very pleased. I think it's an excellent result for the town, and I hope she's going to make lots of great changes.
I think we're on for a winner. Something new, something fresh.
Change is good. I feel a bit sorry for Peter Bone. I think he's been quite a good MP, but he got caught out, didn't he? That's the way it is.
So this is the worst by-election, or excuse me, the worst result in Wellingborough for the Tories in the constituency's entire history. It's very, very bad. And it's interesting what Rishi Sunak said in that package you played at the top, which is this is a midterm by-election. Well, it's not really. They're running out of time. The election year is this year. It's in a few months. And warning lights are flashing all over the place. This is a seat which has been Conservative since 2005. If they can't win here, they are in serious trouble. And internally, that's what MPs are telling me too. They're not quite ready yet for some sort of putsch against Sunak, but they're just very, very fatalistic. They feel defeated already. And that is reflected in the mood here today from the constituents.
Adam, the writing's on the wall then, it's argued, for the Tories. It's going to be a wipeout. So why don't they just go for broke and, quite frankly, just listen to what the people want and introduce some Conservative policies? What's wrong with them?
Well, this is the point the popular Conservatives, Danny Kruger, the new Conservatives, there are so many of these groups. Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates have written a letter today saying, look, we need to do something like this because look at what the voters are telling us. And yet, here the important issues are immigration, tax, cost of living. But I think Rishi Sunak is struggling to spin all these plates because he's worried about losing votes to Labour, as he is doing, not quite as many in this constituency, but broadly speaking. He's hemorrhaging votes all over the place, as I say, so he's going to have to pick a lane, and as you say, perhaps he has to choose the right lane. At the moment, he's got Reform to worry about as well, so it's taking it on all flanks and struggling to make any headway whatsoever.
Yeah, so bit of an understatement. Adam Cherry in Wellingborough on the ground there. Thanks very much. I'm joined now by a man I tease for being a Liberal Democrat in disguise, Albie Amankona, co-host of the Saturday Five, which is on tonight, by the way, 7 till 8 p.m. Tune in. And former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Albie, let's start with you. I do tease you for not being a proper Conservative.
What a surprise.
Why don't the Tories bite the bullet, save themselves and introduce some proper Conservative policies, not least on migration? Pledge to cut legal migration and do something about the boats, turn them back into Australia.
Well, I will just remind you and our wonderful viewers and listeners that it is actually Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly who have brought forward reforms to our immigration system to actually bring down legal immigration in future years. And also they have cut the small boat crossings by a third in 1 year. Immigration was actually liberalised by Priti Patel and Boris Johnson after we left the European Union. James Cleverly and Rishi Sunak are correcting that.
I don't disagree with the Boris point, but to say that Sunak and Cleverly are reforming legal migration, there was a forecast the other day that we're going to have something like 400,000 people a year until the early 2030s. How's that reforming legal migration?
Well, that is too high. Let me be very clear about that. But what was it last year? I believe it was 750,000.
Yeah.
Because of the very liberalisation that Priti Patel and Boris Johnson brought forward, it's going to take time to bring immigration numbers down from that high, which was too high. And obviously, 300 to 400 is much less than 750,000, and it's going to take time to bring it down to levels which are acceptable.
Yeah, well, I'd argue they've just lost the trust of Conservative voters, you know. But Scarlett...
Right.
Let's get to you. Rishi Sunak, yesterday in The Telegraph, he called on British Conservatives to, quote, come together and unite. He didn't mention reform by name, but it kind of, under the surface, was a call of arms for reform to drop out of it and everyone else to unite to beat your man Keir Starmer. Would that work?
Well, no, because for a start, I mean, most of the people in Reform loathe the Tories, and in particular Rishi Sunak. So that's not going to be a coming together, even though Nigel Farage likes to play footsie with the Tories, because obviously he'd like to be the Tory leader. But seriously, for Rishi to think that Reform is his only problem, Keir Starmer is 20 points ahead of Rishi Sunak. I mean, that is something that is amazing. That isn't because of Reform, right? That is because, actually, I'm afraid, Rishi and the Tories are losers.
But what do you make of these Wellingborough stats? Labour only got 107 more seats than 2019. Meanwhile,
107 more votes.
Sorry, yeah. Meanwhile, the Tories lost 24,000. So that Tory vote didn't go to Labour.
No, that Tory vote, as your reporter said, went all over the place. And
it stayed at home, Scarlett, actually. It stayed at home.
They didn't turn up. And that is because they're not going to go out and vote Tory. I mean, it's not that all the Tories are going to go over to Labour, or even all of them are going to go to Reform. But actually, the problem is that at the moment, you look at the Conservative Party and you have no idea what's going to happen next. It's just a series of problems. So, yes, there are... And in Wellingborough, they might only have got 100-odd extra votes. But actually, round the country, you do not get a 20% lead.
What do you mean you've got no idea what's going to happen next with the Conservatives? How can you say that from a Labour perspective when every policy that Keir Starmer has put forward, reforming the House of Lords, the 28 billion green investment, he has gone back on? He's gone back on everything. The Conservatives have a plan. Labour doesn't have a plan.
This is a line. We have no idea what the Conservative plan is. Labour has a plan for growth. Right?
What is the plan? Where's the 28 billion gone?
The plan... Well, the problem with the 28 billion is it now costs so much, because of your wonderful Liz Truss, it now costs so much...
But the economic situation is better now than it was under Liz Truss, so that argument is null and void.
Actually, Albie, it still costs a fortune to borrow, and that's the whole problem. The whole thing about the 28 billion was it was borrowing to invest, and now it costs an awful lot more to borrow, as everybody who has a mortgage in this country knows.
So is Liz Truss responsible for interest rates being risen across the world, in the US and also in Europe?
We know that because she crashed the economy, right, because the markets, not left-wingers, but the markets actually said, we don't trust her anymore. I mean, don't you remember her?
I do remember.
And you watch the pound just go down.
Scarlett,
like that.
Ben knows this better than anyone. I am not a Liz Truss fan by any stretch of the imagination. But are you seriously saying that interest rates now would not be high if Liz Truss was never the Prime Minister?
I don't think they'd be where they are now.
But they'd still be higher than they were before.
they wouldn't. They probably wouldn't be at 1%, right? But what I'm saying is that actually you cannot go into an election saying this is what we're going to do, not knowing what's going to happen when you open the books. Now, it might be wonderful. I mean, perhaps everything's going to be better and they're going to be able to say, actually, we will be able to borrow more. But you have to borrow to invest, right? And you have to be able to borrow at reasonable rates. And
Scarlett, sorry, I was quite enjoying that ding dong, so I'll let you go at each other. I hope you're not too bruised. But
let's feel sorry for him.
Will Sir Keir Starmer be feeling a bit relieved this week, bearing in mind the anti-Semitism rows, all the U-turns, of course, the latest criticism for the £28 billion Green Pledge? He got through those 2 by-elections despite all that. Is he going to be waking up this weekend and, treating himself to a bacon sarnie in celebration?
He's going to be waking up this weekend saying, when are we going to have a general election? Which I think most of us in the country agree, of whatever political colour, let's bring the election on, let's find out what the British people want, and then let's do something about it, instead of going on in this. We know that there's probably going to be another Tory mistake and there's going to be another by-election over some Tory leaving, right? And Labour's going to win it again. It's just going to go on and on and on. Let's kill the pain. Let's have a general election. Let's find out what people want.
One last one with you. Nigel Farage hinted, I think it was this morning or yesterday morning, that if and when the Tories are annihilated at the election, he might consider swooping in like a vulture and remoulding the party alongside the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel, I suspect. What do you make of Nigel at the helm of your party, the Conservatives?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen. Nigel Farage has consistently said over a number of years, I might join the Tory party, this might happen. It's not happened. He'd have to get into the party. Jacob Rees-Mogg, as much as I like him, might actually lose his seat at the next general election. That's how bad things are looking at the moment. So I think this idea that Nigel Farage is going to come over and take over the Conservative Party is quite frankly for the birds, not least because there are actually a lot of Tories that don't like Nigel's politics.
Well, I've always argued with you, Albie, time after time on Saturday 5, that there are no real Conservatives in the Conservative Party, and that's been their main problem. But I'm sure...
I think it's not for you to tell the Conservative Party what they ought to believe in.
Well, what's going... They're how many points behind in the polls?
Yeah, but that's
they're about to get annihilated.
That's not because they're not Conservatives. It's because they're incompetent.
They've got the divine right to think they should be in power, and they've not listened to their members. They've not listened to proper Conservatives.
So, Ben, was Boris Johnson a Conservative?
He was at the start, and he lost his head. He started going down some deranged net zero march.
What about Liz Truss? She was elected by your members,
Scarlett,
only your members.
Liz Truss was the greatest Prime Minister we were never allowed to have. And on that point, we're going to move on. I'm the host, so I'll get that final point in there. Albie Amacona, Scarlett Maguire, thank you so much. Lots of energy, lots of passion. Please behave in the green room. No scuffles. Now, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, go to the website gbnews.com and also catch us on our socials. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. Lots more coming up on today's show, including thousands of pro-Palestine supporters marching in central London today, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We'll be back there live, and all of that more to come. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous,
well,
at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Lots of you have been sending in your thoughts. Ben, not me, says the Conservatives need to give us regular updates on how they're progressing with sorting out both illegal and legal migration into this country. We are in despair over this matter. Ben, I've said for yonks that we've got a Conservative government that allows hundreds of thousands of people into the country legally, doesn't improve infrastructure off the back of it, and then you wonder why you can't get GP appointments or young people can't buy houses and the birth rate collapses. So I agree with you, my friend. Margaret says on Prince Harry, Harry might take on some royal duties while the King is undergoing treatment. Nice gesture, but it wouldn't be just him. She, I take it by she you mean Meghan Markle, would want to be involved. Now we know why he rushed to his father's side. I don't know. I mean, if your family member was, suffering a pretty grim diagnosis, surely you'd be by his side to see how they were doing. I think we've got to give Harry credit on that front. Let's move on, shall we? Let's go back to... actually, let's change a gear. Time for the Great British Giveaway. This is your chance to win £18,000 in cash. Here's all the details you need for a chance to make that yours.
There's still time to become the winner of our Great British Giveaway. There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won. Totally tax-free cash that you could do whatever you like with. That's like having an extra £1,500 in your bank account each month for a whole year. It could go towards your mortgage or rent, buy monthly treats, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Very good. Pretty miffed that I can't enter that. But anyway, now let's move on to these pro-Palestine marches. They're at it again on the streets of London today. Thousands of supporters marching through central London, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Protesters are filling the streets of the capital, waving Palestinian flags and holding placards calling for Palestinian freedom and an end to the war in the Gaza Strip. And I keep saying, probably a few idiots as well, carrying pro-Hamas or pro-Houthi rebel placards and flags. Joining me now is GB News reporter Will Hollis, who's on the ground in London. Will, what's happening there, my friend? Any more action? Is the crowd building in size?
back of the protest that is heading straight down Park Lane, parallel to the edges of Hyde Park, and they're heading in one direction. That's because they're heading towards the Israeli embassy. You can just see how many people there are. I know you just said it, but literally a sea of Palestinian flags, red, white, black and green, and we're right there in the middle of it right now. So this is organised by the Stop the War Coalition as well as the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. It's a global day of action. In fact, it's the 9th one since those attacks on October the 7th, when 1,200 people were killed by Hamas in Israel. And what they're calling for is a ceasefire now, an immediate ceasefire, and they've been doing so since then. This is the 9th day of action, global action, so it's not just here in London. So what you're going to see, as well as a lot of people here protesting, is also a lot of police, and you can see a few here. These ones are liaison support officers, so they're supposed to work directly with the people who are protesting. You'll also see a lot of yellow jackets, 1,500 officers on patrol working for the Met Police today. Not all of them for this, but a massive chunk of them there is. The commander of this particular protest from the Met Police, the man making sure the operation runs as smoothly, safely and legally as it should be. He described the conflict in the Middle East as having a profound and polarising effect on policing here in the capital city. Those police that are working here are going to be looking for a couple of different things. They're going to be looking for people that might be inciting violence or hatred or racism. They're also going to be looking for people that might be supporting the proscribed terrorist organisation Hamas. Now, we saw that come to the courts this week, didn't we? 3 different people were in court at Westminster Magistrates, and they were charged and convicted of terrorism offences for displaying paragliders on their bodies and placards, and that was relating to the attacks. What you'll see in the background, if you just look over into the distance, is a red vehicle, and that's got a massive pole sticking out of it, and that's CCTV, because they're not just watching for people with the eyes and ears of the police, they're also going to be using CCTV, including facial recognition, to look for people that maybe are wanted for already committing offences at these sorts of protests. So that's the policing side of it. Let's do the politics side of it. This isn't just happening in isolation. They're calling on politicians, particularly the 2 main parties, the Conservatives, the government, and Labour right now, because what are we going to see this week? Well, we're going to see a vote in Parliament, the SNP bringing that motion, and will we see Labour ordering their MPs to abstain? We'll see that later this week in Westminster.
Yeah, big problem for Labour on that front. Will Hollis on the ground in London, thanks very much. Let's go to our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. There's another march up there north of the border, which I think is passing the Scottish Labour conference, Tony.
Yes, that's correct. Good afternoon. Certainly, thousands are already gathering in George Square here in the centre of Glasgow, and the plan is to march the short couple of miles here to the Scottish Events Centre on the River Clyde. Now, inside here today and yesterday was the Scottish Labour Conference. Yesterday, Anas Sarwar, he gave his 70-minute mammoth speech, which he called again for an immediate ceasefire. He asked delegates to very carefully separate the actions of Hamas from the Gazan people, as well as the Israeli people from Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Now, he said the peoples of both Gaza and Israel are desperate for peace, and that is what we as a nation should strive for. Now, about a couple of hours ago here at the conference, Scottish Labour delegates, they voted in favour of to support a ceasefire ahead of that crucial vote in the Commons next week. Now, SNP they've called on Scottish Labour to whip its impressive 2 MPs north of the border to vote in favour of a ceasefire. But the last time, if you remember, at the tail end of last year, there was this for Keir Starmer. Well, he lost 10 frontbenchers and aides in a rebellion to that vote. The vote didn't pass then, and those 2 Scottish MPs, well, they chose to abstain in that vote. But it seems to be that from the conference here, the vibe is very much in favour of a ceasefire. Now, some of the language which Anas Sarwar has called semantics, he has used the words quite plainly, a sustained ceasefire. He has said that Keir Starmer has said that the immediate end to fighting, they might not be able to agree to the words, but he says that they certainly agree to the sentiment that at some point the fighting has to stop. So at some point in the next hour or so, we're going to see several thousand people swarm at this area here. Quite a sizable Police Scotland presence here, because behind me in another hall of the Scottish Events Centre is the wedding show, and certainly they're on hand to make sure no altercations occur.
OK, Tony Maguire in Scotland, thanks very much. It's such an awful situation, isn't it? I mean, one side says you can't have a ceasefire until the Israeli hostages are released. Israel's saying that they need to rid Hamas of existence. You know, it's a hard one to wade into, but for me, just please stop killing the kids. I want the kids to stop dying on both sides. A Palestinian kid's life is worth equally as much as an Israeli kid's life. So, regardless of what happens, please stop killing the kids. Now, you're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. Lots more coming up on today's show. But first, let's get the news with Sophia.
Thanks, Ben. It's 1:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Your headlines. There'll be consequences for the death of Alexei Navalny. That was a warning from the Foreign Secretary as he met foreign ministers from the G7 in Munich today. They took part in a minute's silence after visuals and protests were held across the world in support of Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic. Lord Cameron's comments were backed by Sir Keir Starmer as crowds gathered outside the Russian embassy in London, laying tributes and demanding the Russian president be held accountable for his death. Those gathered at the Munich Security Conference voiced their fury, with officials from the US, EU and NATO laying blame on Putin. One person has been arrested as thousands of protesters begin marching in London in support of Palestine. Up to 250,000 people were expected to gather for the demonstration near the Israeli embassy. Around 1,500 police officers from forces across Britain are on public order duties, with those taking part warned to leave by 6 o'clock this evening. In other news, a third of small boat arrivals since 2018 have taken place while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. That's according to new analysis by the Labour Party. They say it's proof the government's focus on its Rwanda plan isn't enough to solve the crisis. The government insists its policies are working, with the number of crossings last year down more than a third compared to a year earlier. And farmers in Kent are staging a protest at a Tesco supermarket, furious at what they say are cheap international imports. Around 20 tractors are parked at Tesco Extra in Whitfield near Dover. They're aiming to raise awareness for what they fear could be a threat to Britain's food security. They say they can't cope with the cheap foreign imports, and unless something is done, British farmers won't be able to afford to feed the British public. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Sophia. And remember, to all you guys at home, get in touch about all of the topics we've been discussing today by emailing me, gbviews@gbnews.com, or message us on our socials @gbnews. And it's funny, isn't it? We get a few emails saying, please stop banging on about Harry and Meghan, we don't care. But the truth of the matter is, you guys love it. It's the top page, the top story of the Mail Online, all the big news stories, and they wouldn't just put the stories up there, same as gbnews.com actually, I should plug our own show, our own website. But the stories wouldn't be up there if people weren't clicking them, so keep those emails coming in. Lots more coming up on today's show, including, as mentioned, Prince Harry gives his first interview since seeing his father. He's hinted the King's cancer diagnosis could heal the rift within the royal family. What do you think? I'm asking, are we heading for a blockbuster royal reconciliation? All of that and more to come. I'm Ben Leo, and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses, can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain,
but it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means 1 year you spend £100, and the next year you spend maybe £101, as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase, and that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo, on your TV, online and digital radio. Lots of emails coming through about the pro-Palestine protests taking place in London today. Some of you, quite rightly, which I missed, said that behind Will Hollis in central London were people walking past masked up, holding placards saying "from the river to the sea." And actually, you have a good point. I can't remember your name who emailed, but I thought the police were meant to be clamping down on that. So anyway, we shift gears now. Yesterday, Prince Harry, he gave his first public interview since his father, the King, was diagnosed with cancer last week. This is what he had to say to Good Morning America, I called it gobbing off, about the effect of his father's illness that had on his own family.
How did you get the news that the King was ill?
I spoke to him.
And what did you do next?
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
What's sort of your outlook on his health?
That stays between me and him.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together.
Just physically being in California, how have you processed the fact that there's so much happening back with your family where you come from?
I have my own family, right? So as we all do, right? So, my family and my life in California is as it is. I've got other trips planned that would take me through the UK or back to the UK. I'll stop in and see my family as much as I can.
All right, I'm delighted to be joined now by royal broadcaster Rafe Hadel-Manku. Rafe, good afternoon. Let me play devil's advocate here. He was asked a question during an interview about Invictus. Some people have said he was gobbing off and using the opportunity from visiting his father last week to plug his own agenda. But what's he meant to say when a reporter says how's your dad doing?
Well, he could have done what his brother, the Prince of Wales, and what the Queen did, was simply to say that he's doing well and to thank well-wishers for their support. Now, he chose to go further from this. I mean, you know, when he went to visit his father, many people were wondering how long it would be before he went in front of the cameras. The answer is 10 days is the answer. That's how long it took him. And yes, to his credit, he didn't go into details on the prognosis of his father's health, and he also said that he loves his family and was
that's a nice thing.
was pleased. So yeah, so
humane thing to
give
do.
him credit for that. But then, of course, yes, he did go on to say that you know, to intimate that the cancer could be a source of reconciliation for his family, saying that all sickness can unite families. Well, I'm sorry, that wasn't on display when his grandparents were very sick and dying, and we know that his antics caused great anguish and heartache to the late Queen and Prince Philip in their final months and years. And we saw no attempt then. You would have thought that their deaths would have been the catalyst for him to come back into the family. Instead, he spent the first months after the Queen's death, the most delicate period for his father, the new king, attacking the royal family and the Queen and the Prince and Princess of Wales. So we haven't really seen any demonstration of that.
So look, there's a great story in the Times today saying that Harry will potentially become a temporary working member of the royal family, maybe covering for King Charles in the coming months. What do you make of that? Is there any truth to it?
Well, it's remarkable. It's been reported from both sides, allegedly, that they've had several phone calls and that he's offered to essentially become a temporary working royal to help alleviate the backlog and all the extra work required with the king out of service. But you have to sort of wonder, where has this change of heart come suddenly? Because the king, you know, obviously the king wants to leave the door open for his son, but we've seen every attempt that the king has made to offer an olive branch has been rejected. I think the real reason here is that Prince Harry and his PR staff realise that his relevance depends entirely on his proximity to the crown. And the last year has seen the Sussexes plummeting in popularity. They've been ridiculed in the press, and no one's had any interest in their non-royal output. The Sussexes are like, you know, like a planet revolving around the sun. It's their proximity to the monarchy that enables it to flourish. And being in California is like being on planet Pluto, essentially.
Well, quite right. That's a good point, Rafe, because this week, of course, they launched their new Sussex.com website, using their titles, giving titles to their children. From my perspective, I've always said, you know, from Meghan's side at least, she spent years and years trashing the royal family, saying how she wanted to kill herself when she was in it. She suffered mental health problems. She hinted heavily that someone made a racist comment about the skin colour of Archie. It goes on and on and on. And I say, do you know what? If that was me, I wouldn't want anything to do with that name, with that connection. I'd have some self-respect, and I'd stop using it. But yet they launched their new website, and it's the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Duchess Meghan.
Just remember, it was only a few months ago they accepted the Robert F. Kennedy Ripple of Hope Award, in part for fighting against racism in the royal family. And they spent so long undermining that institution, you do have to wonder why they now suddenly want to help it out. And you're quite right, as I said, they realise they're not famous because they are entertaining or talented or particularly intelligent. They're none of those things. They're simply royal. That's why I think you've seen the rebranding of the website. That's why they're using the titles of Prince and Princess for the children, because they realise that their only real cachet is their royal status. And it's been a hard lesson that they've learned, particularly over the last year.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say they're not here to defend themselves, of course, Harry and Meghan, but if they were going to defend themselves, what would they say? Let me put the devil's advocate box onto your side.
I've no idea. Well, what would their PR team say? Because I think a lot of this is being driven by their public relations team, who understand, actually, that if they need to have a rebranding, it needs to essentially do what the royal family are doing, but in a North American type of context. That's why we're seeing much more of Meghan trying to become, essentially setting up an American court to rival the court over here, because they think that may be their successful path to become a sort of American-style royal family, get that cachet of royalty, but do things on their own terms in America.
Yeah. And actually, do you know what? On that new website, Meghan bangs on about compassion and being, you know, humanity and generosity and forgiveness. Well, she's not forgiven her estranged, dying father, Thomas Markle, who's had a heart attack, hasn't seen his grandkids, hasn't spoken to him in many, many years. So if you want to display compassion, Meghan, I'd argue maybe give your father a call, ask how he's doing. I'm sure that would cheer him up. Rafe, thank you so much. Appreciate your time, as always. Lots more coming up on today's show, including a judge. He's ruled that former US President Donald Trump, he must pay nearly £281 million to New York State for lying about the values of his properties. He says he's been stitched up. And you know what? When the banks testified in this case, and they said they were happy with the underwriting of Donald Trump's loans, they had no problem, but the Democrat DA and the judge went ahead and did him on anyway. And I think we've got quite an interesting clip of Donald Trump's reaction to that ruling after the break. You won't want to miss that. All of that and more to come. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo, on your TV, online and digital radio. I'm just going to read a couple of emails before we continue. Barbara says, after all the hurt Prince Harry has caused the royal family, he should never be allowed to return to royal duties. Do you know what? I've not seen anything to the contrary today in the inbox, so if there is anyone out there who thinks that Harry should be welcomed back, at least temporarily for some royal duties, please let me know, because I'd love to read them out. Sue says, in my opinion, the only reason Harry was so quick to visit his father was because he realised the king is mortal and will be succeeded by William. He wanted to make sure of any inheritance. I don't know about that. He's probably got a few quid of his own. Let's move on now to America. This story absolutely stunned me yesterday. Donald Trump has been, basically, a judge has ruled that he must pay nearly £281 million, around $350 million, to the New York state for lying about the values of his properties. He was also banned from serving as a company director or taking out loans from banks in the state for 3 years. This is what Trump had to say after the ruling.
He ruled against me before he even got the case. He ruled against me, said I was guilty. He didn't know what I was guilty of before he even got the case. And Letitia James, that's another case altogether. She's a horribly corrupt attorney general, and it's all having to do with election interference.
All right, classic as ever from the Donald there. I'm joined now by spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK, Sarah Elliott. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Good afternoon.
Look, let's get to this. The district attorney who prosecuted Judge was a Democrat, who prosecuted Trump was a Democrat. The judge was a Democrat. Before the district attorney got into power, she said she was going to go after Trump and look in every nook and cranny. This is a stitch-up, isn't it?
I mean, it definitely has that appearance, especially when Deutsche Bank, who was the bank that loaned the money to Donald Trump, of which he's been found guilty of inflating his assets for the loans, the Deutsche Bank actually made money on these loans. Yeah. He paid back the loans. There was no crime. This is the case of looking for a criminal first and then looking for a crime. As you said, Letitia James, a Democrat, ran on wanting to prosecute Trump, get him behind bars. This is part of her campaign agenda. And the American people aren't buying it. The Republican Party is not buying it.
Right, but surely as a former president, he should have faith in his country's judicial system, no?
Yes, but, you know, New York City is a very left-wing, what we would call in America, liberal bastion.
They hate him, don't they?
They hate him, you know, although he built some beautiful buildings and done some wonderful things in New York. There is a bias against him, so I think he is correct in saying that. Even if you're not a Trump fan, you don't agree with everything he says and everything he's done, this does look like lawfare.
All right, what does this mean for Trump's presidency? Because a lot of characters over this side of the pond say that we need a Trump presidency for peace. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Boris Johnson said that he would be a good option for president if he returned. He'd bring world peace. He was, of course, the no-war president. Yep. He was the first leader to meet a North Korean leader across the demilitarised zone. So what does this mean for his second bid for the White House?
Well, you know, first off, with every indictment he got last year, he got more and more popular. So with this kind of, charge and fine to Donald Trump, his popularity will go up. And so this makes it more likely that he could be the U.S. president and thus, have that strong foreign policy he had during his first term, which many of us believe, had he been elected president, we would not have had the war in Ukraine.
Well, Trump, of course, says that he would solve that conflict within 24 hours. Can I just ask you what you made of Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin this week?
I was disappointed. I mean, I think, first off, all journalists should be able to interview any world leader. And it's great that we were able to get 2 hours worth of Putin and to kind of maybe learn about his psyche or his propaganda, whichever one you side with. But I was disappointed in Tucker Carlson's visit to Moscow and speaking to world leaders.
You don't think he should have gone?
No, I just think him praising Russia and praising the Moscow underground system and also really taking down America in front of world leaders just really was untoward and unnecessary and puts American lives at risk overseas. OK,
great stuff. Sarah, thank you. Appreciate your expertise on that. You're listening and watching to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. It remains to be seen whether Donald Trump will win that second presidency. A lot of people this side of the pond certainly want him to. But lots more coming up on today's show, including leaders from around the world have reacted to the news that Russian leader Alexei Navalny has died in prison. Russian officials say he died from a blood clot, not sure about that, while on a walk. But who do you believe? But first, let's take a look at the weather with Craig.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead for the rest of this weekend, we will see a band of heavy rain move across the country. It's all courtesy of these weather fronts. They will just gradually spread their way eastward. But with winds coming in from the southwest, it is going to be a mild weekend for all of us. So this evening we can see the rain working its way in from the west, some heavy outbreaks of rain embedded in it. So we do have some warnings in force across parts of England and Wales. So there will be some fairly difficult driving conditions if you are travelling overnight tonight. But it will be a mild one. Temperatures for many staying in double figures across the south. And these temperatures really are where we should be during the course of the day, not the night time this time of year. So a bit of a slow start across southeastern England, still some heavy rain here, but it should dry up towards lunchtime. And for most of us, it will be a brighter day, the better day of the two, but there will still be a few showery outbreaks of rain around, especially during the middle part of the day. But for all of us, a mild one. Temperatures in the south potentially reaching 15 or 16 degrees. Having a look at Monday, another spell of rain will move its way across the country. Either side, there will be some drier and brighter moments, and again, it will be feeling fairly mild for the time of year. Tuesday, Wednesday, again, remaining fairly changeable. Further spells of rain, especially during the middle of the week, but temperatures for all of us staying in double figures by day.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Thanks very much, Craig. All looks a bit dull, doesn't it, and uninspiring out there. Well, I'll tell you, I booked a holiday last week. I'm going to Tenerife, so see you later as of Tuesday next week. Lots more coming up in today's show, including Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says people are now ready to put their faith in a changed Labour Party. Changed, really, after this week, following a double win in Wellingborough and the Kingswood by-elections yesterday. But Rishi Sunak says the Tories and Reform should unite to beat Starmer. But I tell you what, Richard Tice had something to say about that in the Telegraph yesterday. He said, we're not going to do what the Brexit Party did in 2019 and step aside. You can get stuffed, Conservatives. We're going to enjoy your downfall. We'll be debating if he's right. All of that and more to come. I'm Ben Leo, and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, my friends, and welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Ben Leo, and for the next hour, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and digital radio. I'll keep you up to date on the stories that really matter to you, including, coming up this hour, leaders from around the world. They've reacted to news that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has died in prison. Russian officials say he died from a blood clot while on a walk, but who do you believe? Then some might have thought that support for these so-called hate marchers would have waned by now, but they've been going for 4 consecutive months. Thousands of pro-Palestine supporters are marching in central London today, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We'll be live there on the ground. And Russia's most significant opposition leader for the past decade, Alexei Navalny, as we said, he's died in the Arctic Circle. Foreign Secretary David Cameron says no one should be in any doubt about the dreadful nature of Putin's regime, after what has just happened. I'm asking, do you think Navalny was silenced? And I did just call out for some pro-Harry and Meghan emails. I'll give you one of those very, very quickly. Ben, I think you have no idea of the truth regarding Harry and Meghan. They're being bullied. Why should this amazing couple lie down to keep their haters happy? That's quite a good name, Harry and Meghan. Maybe it would stick. Of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Let me know all your thoughts on the stories we'll be discussing today. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. I'm also keeping a keen eye on your messages, even the abuse, on social media. But first, here's the news with Sophia.
Ben, thank you. It's 2:01. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story. There'll be consequences for the death of Alexei Navalny. That was the warning from the Foreign Secretary as he met foreign ministers from the G7 in Munich today. They took part in a minute's silence after visuals and protests were held across the world in support of Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic. Lord Cameron's comments were backed by Sir Keir Starmer as crowds gathered outside the Russian embassy in London, laying tributes and demanding the Russian president be held accountable for his death. Those who gathered at the Munich Security Conference voiced their fury, with officials from the US, EU and NATO laying the blame on Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the conference the Russian leader is a thug who must be stopped.
After the murder of Alexei Navalny, it's absurd to perceive Putin as a supposedly legitimate head of a Russian state. And he is a thug who maintains power through corruption and violence, coming to his so-called inauguration, shaking his hand, considering him an equal means to disdain the very nature of political power.
In other news, one person has been arrested as thousands of protesters march in London in support of Palestine. Up to 250,000 people are expected at the demonstration near the Israeli embassy. Around 1,500 police officers from forces across Britain are on public order duties, with those taking part warned to leave by 6 o'clock this evening. GB News reporter Will Hollis is there.
There is a sea of Palestinian flags in the capital city today for the 9th day of protests since those October the 7th attacks. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of people making their way down Park Lane next to Hyde Park, and they're heading in one direction. That's towards the Israeli embassy. They're calling with one voice for a ceasefire in the week that Parliament will be voting for one. Now, what you'll also see is a lot of yellow jackets. The police here say that what is going on in the Middle East, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, Israel and Hamas, is having a profound and polarising effect on how they can police the capital city.
Now, a third of small boat arrivals since 2018 have taken place while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. That's according to new analysis by the Labour Party. That's after 52 people reportedly crossed the Channel by small boat yesterday, meaning there's been just over 38,500 arrivals since Mr Sunak became Prime Minister. Labour says it's proof the government's focus on its Rwanda plan isn't enough to solve the crisis. But the government insists its policies are working, with the number of crossings last year down by more than a third compared to a year earlier. Farmers in Kent are staging a protest at a Tesco supermarket, furious at what they say are cheap international imports. Around 20 tractors are parked at Tesco Extra in Whitfield, near Dover, to raise awareness of what they fear could be a threat to Britain's food security. They say they can't compete with the cheap foreign imports, and unless something is done, British farmers won't be able to afford to feed the British public. And Donald Trump has been ordered to pay $354.9 million in penalties for fraudulently inflating his net worth to dupe lenders. He's also been banned from running any business in New York for 3 years. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and called the case a political vendetta. This latest case comes as the former president appears to be cruising to the Republican nomination despite multiple other legal battles. And the Duke of Sussex is reportedly willing to step into royal duties while his father undergoes cancer treatment. According to reports in The Times, Harry is said to have told friends he'd be willing to cover some duties while his father recovers. It comes after Prince Harry hinted at a possible reconciliation with his father during an interview on American television. He said he was grateful for the time he spent with his father during a short visit to London last week. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Ben.
Thanks, Sophia. Now let's get stuck into today's topics. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says people are now ready to put their faith in a changed Labour Party following that double win in Wellingborough and Kingswood by-elections yesterday. Rishi Sunak, meanwhile, he says the circumstances facing the Tories, this always makes me laugh, they are challenging, really. But insists Labour doesn't have a plan.
Midterm by-elections are always difficult for incumbent governments, and the circumstances of these by-elections were, of course, particularly challenging. Now, I think if you look at the results, very low turnout, and it shows that we've got work to do to show people that we are delivering on their priorities, and that's what I'm absolutely determined to do, but also shows that there isn't a huge amount of enthusiasm for the alternative in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and that's because they don't have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you can't deliver real change. And when the general election comes, that's the message I'll be making to the country. Stick with our plan because it is starting to deliver the change that the country wants and needs.
All right, stick with Rishi. He says the plan is going to work. Do you trust him? Joining me now is GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Nigel, Rishi Sunak has got a point there. In Wellingborough, Labour only increased their vote count by 107 from 2019. Meanwhile, the Tories lost a whopping, well, nearly 25,000 on the nose. So people aren't going from the Tories to Labour. They're just so disillusioned, they're not voting.
No, I think you're right there, Ben, that the reason both in Kingswood and Wellingborough was the Tory vote simply staying at home. People are so disillusioned with the Tories, they just weren't prepared to come out and vote. I think that's a pity. I think that even if you don't like any of the candidates, that voting is a precious and hard-won right. And the least you should do is show that you're not complacent, turn out, spoil your ballot paper, write a rude message to the candidates, which they will read, because candidates read every single spoiled ballot paper.
Nigel, Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger, prominent Tory MPs, the co-chairs of the new Conservatives group of backbench MPs, they've urged the government to change course after that by-election bloodbath. They urged Rishi Sunak to, quote, cut taxes that hit working families, including lowering the rate of income tax and raising punitive thresholds. What do you make of that? Is that the right course of action to save Sunak's skin?
Well, the problem with that is that you still have inflation at double the 2% target that the Bank of England sets for it. So really, tax cuts at the moment are going to be irresponsible as far as the economy goes. Now, it's an election year. The chances are we will get some tax cuts in the budget next month. Quite how much that the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, can afford to spend remains to be seen. He seems to be dampening down expectations at the moment. So the plan that Rishi Sunak keeps banging on about doesn't seem to be working, that he hasn't stopped the boats. He's not getting any credit for the national insurance cut from last year. So at the moment, it just seems to be all gloom and doom for the Tory party.
Nigel, do you know what? I mean, I might sound naive here, but I don't think many people really care about, 2p tax cuts here and there or inflation coming down by this date. Inflation's coming down globally anyway, so I'm not going to give Sunak credit for that. Why don't the Conservatives, they've got nothing to lose, they're facing extinction at this election, why don't they just say, we're going to stop the boats by leaving the ECHR, we're going to commit to that, we're going to think about a turn-back policy akin to Australia. Why don't they just grab the bull by the horns and give the people what they want, conservatism?
Because it wouldn't work. I mean, you mentioned the turning the boats back to France. These are not French citizens, and
they came from France. It was a safe country.
They may have done, but they passed through France rather than actually arrive there. They arrived from a lot of other countries too.
Well, they can stay there, can't they? That's where they came from. Australia turned boats back in the middle of the ocean, put them in safe vessels, and they literally towed them back either to where they came from or to offshore processing sites. It works for them.
If you've got an offshore processing site, which is what Italy is doing with Albania, then you can do that. We haven't got any offshore processing sites. That our Rwanda scheme is not about offshore processing. It's about sending people to Rwanda and them staying there. Now, you can't tow them all the way to Rwanda, even if Rwanda was working. And certainly just turning them back the way the Australians did doesn't work. There are no international waters between here and France. There's 150 miles between Australia and Indonesia, and the boats are bigger. You start turning them back, boats are going to sink.
What about the Falklands?
Well, that's an even longer way to go to tow a boat. And I'm not sure Falkland Islanders will be terribly keen on their islands.
OK, look, Nigel, we're getting bogged down in my point about the turn-back policy then, but what about leaving the ECHR? Just commit to it. That's what people want.
Well, people may want it. I mean, the question really is whether or not that we want to be to go along with international law or not. So turning our backs on the ECHR causes all sorts of problems, not least what would happen in Northern Ireland over the peace process. That relies on the European Convention on Human Rights. And the peace process there would be in danger if we decided to leave ECHR.
Well, Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister, he told Patrick Christys the other night that actually we should declare this illegal boat problem, the boats coming on the southern border, as a national security threat, and that way we could get a lot more done. But Nigel Nelson, senior political commentator for GB News, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. OK, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, and I'm sure you guys have got a lot to say about the boats and how the Tories can turn things around, go to the website, gbnews.com, and also hit us up on our socials. Right, let's head to Russia. Vladimir Putin must pay. That's what leaders have been saying from around the world in reaction to the news that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has died in prison.
Reports of his death, if they're true, and I have no reason to believe they're not, Russian authorities are going to tell their own story. But make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible.
Well, the UK Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron says that Putin should be held accountable for what's happened. No one should doubt the dreadful nature of his regime, quote-unquote. Navalny, meanwhile, he was serving a 19-year prison sentence after being convicted of extremism and fraud following his vocal opposition to Vladimir Putin's regime. The Russian prison service said Navalny collapsed and lost consciousness during a walk. His widow, Yulia, has pleaded to the world to punish Putin.
I want to call on the entire world community, everyone in this room and people around the world, that we come together to unite and defeat this evil, defeat the horrific regime that is now in Russia.
All right, joining me now is the host of GB News Saturday 5 show, which is on tonight, 7 till 8. We'll be on there with the man himself, Darren Grimes, and political correspondent Emma Burnell. Darren, let me start with you. This, of course, comes off the back of Tucker Carlson's now infamous interview with Vladimir Putin last week. The timing is interesting, isn't it? Why would Putin execute a political rival just when all the eyes of the world are on him following that Tucker Carlson interview?
Well, we've just seen footage, actually, in the Mail of his mother coming out of the prison and saying, look, I want my son's body back and all the rest of it. So we do have some confirmation now, at least, that he is actually dead.
Yeah.
And, you know, the question marks remain around what's happened and how it's been done. He was perfectly fine on Wednesday when his lawyer was with him, and he was his usual gregarious gallows humour self. You know, he had a quick wit, almost British in his wit, actually. So it's a deeply sad state of affairs. But I think, actually, to a certain extent, Tucker has been President Putin's useful idiot. I mean, we saw footage of him, and Emma, I think we'll actually agree on this.
And this is getting embarrassing, Darren. We're starting to agree far too often.
Because I saw footage of Tucker in a Russian supermarket, and he was talking about the merits of and actually the way in which you can put a coin into a trolley and receive a trolley. And I thought, has he been to any Asda in the United Kingdom or wherever else? Other supermarkets are, of course, available. And I worry that actually this is all being part of a ploy to actually boost Russia's international recognition, because all eyes were on him again, right? They had taken their eyes off Russia and the Ukraine because of the fact that Israel and Gaza have been on the nation and the world's mind. So I am a bit concerned that actually Tucker has been played to a large extent.
Emma, Tucker has been embarrassed. I mean, Nigel Farage told me yesterday that he was pretty disappointed with his interview. He didn't press him. And, do you know what? Even Putin came out himself and said, I was surprised with how bad...
Yeah, Putin said it was too softball an interview. I mean...
How does that... I mean, maybe I'm just connecting the dots, but how does that coincide with the death now of Alexei?
Well, I think the thing that we need to look at in terms of the timing is the Munich conference. This was done to troll world leaders and to make it very clear by Putin that he is playing by his own rules and his own game. And there is a vast misunderstanding, I think, that nobody took Putin seriously enough soon enough. And the fact that he was so willing to abuse his own citizens first, then the invasion of Ukraine, I just think we all need to be taking the threat that he is to world stability so much more seriously than we have been. And that probably starts with this one very high-profile case.
Yeah. Go on, Darren.
I mean, Nigel Nelson was just saying to you, Ben, about actually how people should go out and spoil their ballot if they don't want to vote, and actually speaking about the importance of democracy. Well, people mourning the death of Navalny on the streets of Russia have actually been arrested, right? People are being clamped down upon.
About 100 arrests.
So I think it's a really important point that Nigel raises, actually, and one that we should be mightily aware of. But I would say I think it's terribly naive of people like Lord David Cameron to turn around and say, actually, Putin must be punished. What are we supposed to do? We cannot go to war with these people. I think that sort of rhetoric is actually incredibly dangerous, because ultimately, what Navalny's death has shown is that Putin now has political invulnerability. He is no longer vulnerable at the ballot box. He has managed to see off his biggest opposition, quite literally see him off.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And I'm not sure that this kind of rhetoric from our Foreign Secretary is at all useful or actually at all remotely viable or sensible.
And Emma, do you know what? I love my country. I'm quite patriotic, but what on earth do our leaders think we are going to do in a military conflict with Russia?
So I don't think it's about us going into a war, a hot war with Russia.
They've been it up the last couple of weeks.
I think it's more about they have, but again, I think that is largely pre-budget MOD positioning. But there are things that we can do. We could, for example, put much more pressure on, for example, the Republican Party in the US to step up and help to fund the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is where the front line is happening, and I know some Ukrainians who have come over here as refugees as a result. They are incredibly passionate about the need, not just for that war to be won for their own country, but because that is, if it doesn't stop in Ukraine, there are other places, former Iron Curtain countries, that are absolutely terrified that they will be next. That is what I mean by taking Putin seriously. It's not a case of us saying, oh, yeah, we're going to invade Russia tomorrow. I don't want to go down the Kenny Everett route.
A lot of our viewers would say, is our bottomless pit of taxpayer money to fund this war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, is it sustainable? Do we want to keep sending billions and billions? The Republicans in America are umming and ahhing about sending another, 90 billion? Is that an issue, or have they got a good point?
Well, I think Emma has a point in that things are going to change in the United States of America. You know, the Democrats may well be on their way out if Poland is to be believed and President Trump back in office. Now, what does that mean for Ukraine? Because if the United States position changes, we are not spending anywhere near enough, Ben, on defence in this country. So the idea that we can continue to support Ukraine on our own or with other European allies is for the birds. So actually what America does, I'm afraid that to a large extent, and we've been talking this morning, you and I, about the way in which the United States of America is seeking extradition of Julian Assange, for example. So all of these things are called into question, and the nature of what we do, I think, is reflected by what America wants to happen.
Emma, I will make that point. Julian Assange has been rotting in Belmarsh since 2019 with no trial. Before that, he was holed away in the dusty Ecuadorian embassy because he committed the crime of releasing and exposing American war crimes. It's rank hypocrisy, isn't it, from the likes of David Cameron?
Look, I don't have a strong point on Julian Assange. There are other things that I would take issue with him over and above WikiLeaks, which I think has played an important role in putting sunlight into certain areas, and at other times has played a considerably less salubrious role. So I think that there are questions to be asked about Julian Assange himself and WikiLeaks as a whole, as an organisation, where it's done right and wrong. But I think in terms of what changes in American foreign policy might have, when we're talking about investing in defence, when we're talking about investing money in Ukraine, we know that war in Ukraine has cost us not the money that we're putting in just in sending support to the Ukrainians. It's more because of the way that the Russian aggression there has raised world prices. And when we are saying we have to be strong, part of that is to make sure that things like gas prices come down, that we have gas security in the UK. That is an important part of our national security programme that we've let completely drop.
Would have been good if we became self-sustainable and built some nuclear power stations 10 years ago when we had...
Well, indeed, I couldn't agree more.
Right, I'll move on. Darren Grimes, thank you very much. Saturday 5 tonight. What
Absolutely,
time?
7 o'clock.
With
See
me,
you there.
who else?
We've got Belinda DeLucy, we've got Benjamin Butterworth, the wokest man in Britain, and Albie Ammon-Kona.
Queen Gammon, Belinda DeLucy.
Absolutely.
As she likes to call herself. And political consultant Emma Burnell, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Donald Trump, of course, says he reckons that he'd end the Ukraine war within 24 hours if he was president. Remains to be seen, I guess. You're listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. Lots more coming up on today's show, including thousands of pro-Palestine supporters marching in central London. And by the way, when we went to the ground with Will Hollis, we saw people walking past with masks on, holding placards saying "from the river to the sea." I thought the cops were clamping down on that. Obviously not. They're calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We'll be back on the ground there. All of that and more to come. You're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offender behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, let's go to the streets of London, where thousands of pro-Palestine supporters are marching in central London, of course, as I said, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Protesters are filling the streets of the capital, waving Palestinian flags, holding placards, calling for Palestinian freedom and, of course, an end to the war in the Gaza Strip. Joining me now is GB News reporter Will Hollis, who's in the capital. Oh, Will, seems a lot busier than the last couple of hours. Let me just make this point to you, Will. I've seen in our last couple of hits placards saying from the river to the sea. I thought the cops were clamping down on that nonsense.
Yes, well, it's in the shadow of some of Britain's biggest war memorials that right now hundreds of thousands of people are marching through the city streets of London, calling for a ceasefire in one of the most deadly conflicts that's happened in the Middle East for many, many years. And they're here because they're calling for that ceasefire, the Stop the War Coalition and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. And they're moving down along the side of Hyde Park, and there's hundreds of thousands of people, a sea of Palestinian flags, as well as some Union Jacks in there as well. And there's only one direction that they're going in for this particular march, the 9th global march that's taken through the cities since October the 7th, when 1,400 people were killed by Hamas in Israel. And the direction that they're going is actually the Israeli embassy, and it's significant because this is the first time that protesters have done this since October the 7th. And they're calling for a ceasefire because they're saying that the death toll of 28,000 Palestinians, mainly women and children, is too high, and they're calling on our politicians to back that ceasefire. You're going to see a lot of police here as well in the capital city, 1,500 officers that are on patrol across the city, but most of them are here. And the commander in charge of policing this event from Met Police, he says that what is going on in the Middle East is having a profound and polarising effect on policing in the capital city. Now, what they're going to be looking for is a couple of things. They're going to be looking for people that might be supporting Hamas, that might be supporting a proscribed terrorist organisation, and they're also going to be looking for anybody that might be inciting violence or hatred or racism. Now, they're going to be looking with their eyes and their ears, but they're also going to be looking with CCTV, and they're going to be doing that using facial recognition cameras as well as just regular CCTV cameras, looking for not just people that are here right now, but potentially people that have been wanted for offences and crimes relating to the other protests that have been happening here. Now, this isn't happening in isolation. This is happening right now because there is going to be a vote in Parliament. Not just the Conservatives, not just the government, but also Labour is going to have a lot of pressure put on them, calling for a ceasefire. The SNP tabling that motion. But will the two biggest parties, the Conservatives and the Labour, be supporting it this week?
Hollis on the ground in London, thanks very much. I don't know if you saw, Will, but somebody walked past you with a placard saying, "Hands off Yemen." I don't know what these clowns think is going on in the Red Sea, but Houthi rebel terrorists are turning commercial ships around. They're boarding ships with AK-47s. They're engaging in conflicts with various navies. What do you mean, hands off Yemen? But we'll leave it there with you, my friend. Thanks very much. Let's go to Scotland now, where our Scottish reporter, Tony Maguire, is at a similar march. Tony, what's the news on the ground? It looks a bit more peaceful there compared to central London.
Indeed, yes. Good afternoon. Well, I'm at the Scottish Event Centre here on the Clyde side of Glasgow, and this is the destination for today's march from George Square over to the SEC, and that's because behind me is the Scottish Labour Conference, and yesterday we heard a 70-minute mammoth speech from Anas Sarwar decry the acts of Hamas back in October, and also of the bombardment of Gaza and the number of civilian children that have died along the way. Now, a couple of hours ago, there was a vote held at the conference, and they voted to agree, with nobody speaking out and against, to a ceasefire. And of course, this all comes ahead of next week's vote in the Commons, which the SNP is bringing yet another ceasefire vote. Last time, the two Scottish Labour MPs, they chose to abstain from that vote. And if you remember, well, Keir Starmer, he lost a significant chunk of his front bench that day, along with several aides. Now, the SNP, they're basically trying to apply pressure on Scottish Labour to whip those two MPs into voting for in support of a ceasefire. And of course, that has been such a huge talking point at this conference. But as we speak, there are thousands of people about halfway along the route now. I really thought they would be here a little bit sooner. But indeed, the Glasgow weather, you can always rely to slow things down to a grinding halt. But certainly that says nothing of the police presence here. Several dozen police here today already. And we did see them at one point actually widening the cordon because perhaps they underestimated the number of protesters. Looking at the CCTV images of George Square earlier on this afternoon, it did look like there were increasingly several thousand and many, many more joining. So they're on their way here. Behind me is the Labour conference, but also the wedding show. So Police Scotland certainly on hand to make sure that everything runs smoothly.
All right, great stuff. Tony Maguire in Scotland, thanks very much. Do you know what? I question the intention of these marches because they started days after the terrorist attack on October the 7th, Israel's worst atrocity since the Holocaust. So when you get people, as we saw in Will Hollis's report, walking around with hands off Yemen, like I'll say it again, they're a bunch of clowns. How can you support terrorists turning back commercial ships? In my opinion, of course. But yeah, it remains to be seen what happens with that. They want a ceasefire. Will they get it? I guess it's down to Hamas to release the hostages first. Now, you're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. Lots more coming up on today's show. Half an hour left. But first, here's the news with Sophia.
Thanks, Ben. It's 2:32. I'm Sophia Wenslet in the GB newsroom. There'll be consequences for the death of Alexei Navalny. That was the warning from the Foreign Secretary as he met foreign ministers from the G7 in Munich today. They took part in a minute's silence after vigils and protests were held across the world in support of Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic. Lord Cameron's comments were backed by Sir Keir Starmer as crowds gathered outside the Russian embassy in London, laying tributes and demanding the Russian president be held accountable for his death. Those gathered at the Munich Security Conference voiced their fury, with officials from the US, EU and NATO laying blame on Putin. One person has been arrested as thousands of protesters march in London in support of Palestine. Up to 250,000 people are expected at the demonstration near the Israeli embassy. Around 1,500 police officers from forces across Britain are on public order duties, with those taking part warned to leave by 6 o'clock this evening. A third of small boat arrivals since 2018 have taken place while Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. That's according to new analysis by the Labour Party. They say it's proof the government's focus on its Rwanda plan isn't enough to solve the crisis. The government insists its policies are working, with the number of crossings last year down by more than a third compared to a year earlier. And farmers in Kent are staging a protest at a Tesco supermarket, furious at what they say are cheap international imports. Around 20 tractors are parked at Tesco Extra in Whitfield near Dover. They're aiming to raise awareness of what they fear could be a threat to Britain's food security. They say they can't compete with cheap foreign imports, and unless something is done, British farmers won't be able to afford to feed the British public. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Ben.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Now, remember, you guys at home, you can get in touch about all of the topics we've been discussing today. Donald Trump, Alexei Navalny, the Tory bloodbath in the by-election, Harry and Meghan, of course, by emailing us, gbviews@gbnews.com, or on our socials, we're at GBNews. Lots more coming up on today's show, including, as mentioned, we'll be delving into more of Russia's most significant opposition leader for the past decade, Alexei Navalny, who has died in an Arctic Circle jail. Sounds pretty grim. Foreign Secretary David Cameron says, quote, no one should be in any doubt about the dreadful nature of Vladimir Putin's regime in what Russia has after what's just happened. So I'm asking you guys at home, the viewers, do you think Navalny was silenced? Or is there more to this? Get in touch on the emails. All of that and more to come. I'm Ben Leo, and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has made her much-anticipated appearance before the Scottish COVID inquiry today. It comes after allegations emerged that she deleted key pandemic WhatsApp messages, used the pandemic to push her own political agenda. But let's just cast our mind back, shall we, to August 2021, when Sturgeon was asked if she'd hand over all her WhatsApps to the inquiry. Here we go.
I think if you understand statutory public inquiries, you would know that even if I wasn't prepared to give that assurance, which for the avoidance of doubt I am, then I wouldn't have the ability. This will be a judge-led statutory public inquiry.
Which, for the avoidance of doubt, I am. OK. Well, you weren't, were you? But fast forward to today, and she was much less forthcoming.
WhatsApp messages between yourself and Mr Yusuf and Ms Lloyd were produced by you. Where did you get them?
They were provided to me through the Scottish Government.
But did you delete them?
Yes.
Did you consider yourself, against that background and your considerable ministerial experience, to be precisely the right First Minister for the job?
No, that's not how I would have thought of it at all. There's a large part of me wishes that I hadn't been.
All right, then. I'm joined now by Tory MP Lee Anderson. Lee, are those just crocodile tears?
Well, it looks like crocodile tears to me, Patrick. I mean, first we had the missing camper van. Nobody knows where that is. Now we've got this nonsense. We've got these burner phones, dodgy £5 phones from wherever they bought them from, WhatsApp messages going missing. It all looks a little bit dodgy to me. I mean, she's bleating on there, she's crying on screen. This is not cutting no ice. You know, it's crocodile tears. It makes you wonder what the SNPs are all about, Patrick. It looks... I mean, the people that have burner phones, let's be clear, people that have these dodgy phones where you can't trace them and disappearing WhatsApp messages, these are normally criminals, these are drug dealers, and you know what, these SNPs are no better than criminals.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo, on TV, online and digital radio, of course. I'm going to get stuck into some emails now, some very quick ones. John says, of course, Navalny was silenced. Putin got rid of him before the Russian elections, where no one will now challenge him. Mark says, even if Navalny died of a blood clot, it would have been due to poor health, due to the bad living conditions of his prison situation. Of course, he was in that Arctic prison about 1,500 miles north of Moscow. I think the temperatures were something like minus 28 degrees. And Jennifer says, of course, the Russian opposition leader was murdered. What a brave man. What's the point of having an election in Russia? Really good question, and I'm going to put that now to our next guest. I'll tell you who that is in just a minute. He's an expertise in foreign intelligence, Philip Ingram. The Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, he says Vladimir Putin should be held accountable for the death of Alexei Navalny. Lord Cameron said the Russian president had fabricated charges against the opposition politician, and no one should be in doubt about the dreadful nature of his regime. Philip Ingram joins me now, former senior military intelligence officer. Philip, is this as clear-cut as appears in the media? Putin, he's taken out a political rival. My question was, well, it's more of an interesting point. Why did it come to coincide with Tucker Carlson's infamous involvement in Russia last week?
Well, it's not completely clear-cut because Navalny's not a well man, having been poisoned with Novichok a couple of years ago, and as you say, in this extreme prison, 1,500 kilometers north of Moscow, but he was under the care of the Russian state prison system, and Vladimir Putin has got a habit of taking those out who oppose him, whether it be by forcing him to take up a window cleaning job, deciding to have a heart attack next Saturday, or mysteriously dying, as we've seen with Navalny here. And Putin has silenced him, stopped him from running against him in the presidential election by getting him a criminal conviction. But what's of interest to me is this is exactly a month before Putin's presidential election. The last time there was a presidential election, exactly 10 days before it, was whenever there was the attack on Sergei Skripal. So I think this is Putin sending a message to those that are potentially going to oppose him, saying, I don't stand for opposition.
What do you make of the UK government summoning the Russian embassy in London? I mean, to be frank, what's the point of that? What are the Russians in London going to say?
It's diplomatic dancing. It's going to achieve no more than a stiff letter being handed across to say this is unacceptable. But actually, more important, David Cameron's across at the Munich Security Conference. He's talking to a lot of his international partners, and there's a big clamour to try and increase the amount of support that's been given to Ukraine. Ukraine is suffering a lack of ammunition at the moment, and also getting access potentially to frozen Russian assets. There's a lot of debate going on as to whether those frozen assets should be used to help the Ukrainians fund their war against Russia and to help fund the reconstruction of Ukraine.
Philip, you're a military man. When does this war end, and are the Russians winning?
The war's got many years to go yet. The Russians aren't winning. We analyse success or failure a little bit too much in a one-dimensional way by trying to look at how the front line moves. And the Russians are making progress on the front line. The Ukrainians have just withdrawn from the city of Avdiivka that they've been trying to defend since 2014. But what we miss then is the sort of the third or fourth dimension of the conflict that's going on, and that's all happening in the background. And we see that with the Ukrainians sinking the Russian Black Sea Fleet time after time. There's reports today that 3 Russian fighter jets have been shot down. We keep hearing of Russian oil refineries mysteriously blowing up, military factories blowing up. Drones have been fired at Russian airfields inside Russia and at Moscow. We keep hearing of Russian command and control headquarters being blown up, Russian logistic bases, their railway lines. All of this is hollowing Russia out from behind. And Russia's losing about 1,000 troops a day on the front line. It can't keep up with its own ammunition usage and is now relying on North Korea.
So, sorry to interject, why hasn't Ukraine done the business yet? They're getting untold amounts of taxpayer money from the US and America. Why haven't they finished the job?
Because land warfare is exceptionally complex. You have to fight over every metre of ground, and that is crawling with 60 plus kilograms of kit and fighting your way through against individuals who are physically fighting back against you. It's not something that you can do quickly. This will take years.
Well, they always used to say when I was growing up that we'd never see a land warfare conflict again. They said it would be jets and drones. And when you see some of the footage doing the rounds on the internet of these young lads, both Russian and Ukrainian, being sent to war, you know, it beyond the headlines and the conjecture, it really hits home what these guys are going through. But former senior military intelligence officer Philip Ingram, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. OK, you're watching Listening to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo. Lots more coming up on today's show, including as second-hand electric car prices plunge across the board. No surprise in my book. I think they're absolutely torrid. I'm asking, are we seeing the beginning of the end of the electric car revolution? I know some of you are big fans of Tesla and the like, and of course, the climate argument has its strengths as well. But my problem with them is just, you know, can you trust going from London to Scotland in a Tesla without filling up on electricity, without the worry about being dumped by the side of the motorway? I don't think so. All of that and more coming up. You're watching, listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Ben Leo, on your TV, online and digital radio. Time now for the Great British Giveaway, and this is your chance to win £18,000 in cash. Here's all the details you need for a chance to make that yours.
There's still time to become the winner of our Great British Giveaway.
There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won. Totally tax-free cash that you could do whatever you like with. That's like having an extra £1,500 in your bank account each month for a whole year. It could go towards your mortgage or rent, buy monthly treats, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 23rd of February. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Lovely. Good luck to you on that. Now, last year, second-hand electric car prices plunged across the board. Some have blamed the steep fall in value because of rising interest rates and the impact of the cost of living crisis on drivers' disposable income. While lower prices are, of course, good for the general consumer, the sluggish second-hand market slammed the brakes on electric cars, or have they? Joining me now is motoring journalist Quinton Wilson. Quinton, let me just be frank, isn't this because electric cars are a bit naff and, like me, we just prefer the smell and the sound and the vibrations of a Land Rover or a Defender?
Well, look, Ben, I'm sensing that you don't drive an electric car and you don't like them. Look, I've been driving them since 2009. I've driven to France and back, 780 miles one way at 3 charges. They work, and really your viewers should talk to people who own electric cars to get the full picture. Of course, they depreciated last year because consumers aren't buying big ticket items, as you said. You know, the Q4 was a recession technically. But they are used a real bargain at the moment, and that's why the used market has grown by 91% for EVs. And you know, people are saying that actually they've got price parity used with petrol and diesel cars. So
how much can you get a second-hand Tesla for, Quinton, at the moment?
15 grand for a Model 3.
OK, and they were originally new, what, 45 or something?
Yeah, and he did several cuts, and I bought one 3 years ago, and it's done 40,000 miles. I haven't had any issues at all with it, and I'm not going to get rid of it anytime soon because it's great and it works. But, you know, it's a great time to buy an electric car now because prices are so low. And one of the reasons, Leo, that they are low is, yeah, sure, we've had this technical recession in Q4, but also there's this tirade of anti-EV misinformation on the media. So consumers read it and they go to social media, they read the papers. One paper, 160 continuous days of anti-EV stories, and they say, no, I don't want one of these cars. So again, I stress, you know, if you're thinking about buying an electric car, talk to someone who has driven and owned one, and not listen to people who haven't driven or owned one and who are ideologically opposed to electric cars on a cellular basis, like you, Leo.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I am inching towards the idea because the amount of times I've been at traffic lights and I've been side by side with a Tesla, they are rapid. They are so quick. You know, even against supercars, McLarens and Ferraris, they're brilliant. But Quinton, the concern is that there's just not the infrastructure in the UK. You said you drove to France. When was that? Where was it from? What car? Did you stop to fill up?
That was Birmingham to Bordeaux. I charged at home and then did 3 charges in France and got there fine and got there back. Now, there are 1 million EVs on British roads. Are we seeing them, you know, running out of battery on the hard shoulder? We're not. And are we hearing from those 1 million people who say, I want to give it back, I don't like it? No, we're not. Yes, the infrastructure needs work, and we need those 300,000 chargers, and I'm pushing the government as hard as I can. But the government is kind of fossil fuel. So then, you know, the Conservatives really aren't interested in this, whereas Labour, I think, are much more. So look, yes, we need more infrastructure, but 80% of people who own electric cars charge them at home while they sleep.
OK, all right, you're slowly convincing me, Quinton. You say they're not breaking down on the hard shoulder, but you have seen media stories of...
I'll take you out in my electric car and we'll have a few hours, and I'll tell you, mate. I will.
Sounds good. Let's do it. You can turn me over to the dark side. Quinton Wilson, motoring journalist, thanks very much. you fancy electric cars, Nana?
No, it's an empty promise. He promised me the same thing. I don't believe a word of it.
They're just not for me. No, I prefer... Do you know, my favourite smell is petrol. I know it sounds very bizarre, but...
No, I don't want one. I can see the downfalls. They're very heavy. It's just... I'm not buying it. And I also don't like the fact that we're being forced. I'm not going to do it because I'm being forced to do it. It's like when I was young. That was me.
Yeah.
I'll do it if I want to. But listen, we've got loads coming up.
What's on your show?
I've got Dame Andrea Jenkins. She's my political spotlight.
Legend.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about the whole thing, you know, Labour Party winning 2 by-elections, but with a very small turnout. Also, Uri Geller will be talking about what's going on in Israel.
Is he still in Israel?
He's still in Israel. He's at his museum. Thankfully, nothing's happened to him and those around him, but obviously there's a lot going on there. We've got the protests. We're going to leave the protests because I'm a bit sick and tired of them taking up every weekend. I'm fed up with them.
Well, that's the thing. Did you see today Will Hollis is down in London? Even after all the conjecture and the rhetoric from the police, we're going to clamp down on this. People walking past with placards saying... one was saying, hands off Yemen. Other people... viewers have emailed saying people were holding signs saying from the river to the sea. So, you know, they're not acting on it.
They don't understand what the Houthis are. I mean, the Houthis are pirates and also terrorists. I mean, it's quite straightforward. So if that's what they're after, then, you know, support the Houthis. But there's loads going on in the show.
All right. Sounds like a cracking show. Look forward to it. That's all from me from today. You've been watching, listening to GB News Saturday with Ben Leo. Thank you so much for joining us and for your emails. Do not go anywhere. Nana is up next, and I'm back tomorrow. Oh, tonight, actually, by the way, Saturday 5. But let's...
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead for the rest of this weekend, we will see a band of heavy rain move across the country. It's all courtesy of these weather fronts. They will just gradually spread their way eastward. But with winds coming in from the southwest, it is going to be a mild weekend for all of us. So this evening we can see the rain working its way in from the west, some heavy outbreaks of rain embedded in it. So we do have some warnings in force across parts of England and Wales. So there will be some fairly difficult driving conditions if you are travelling overnight tonight. But it will be a mild one. Temperatures for many staying in double figures across the south. And these temperatures really are where we should be during the course of the day, not the night time this time of year. So a bit of a slow start across southeastern England, still some heavy rain here, but it should dry up towards lunchtime. And for most of us, it will be a brighter day, the better day of the two, but there will still be a few showery outbreaks of rain around, especially during the middle part of the day. But for all of us, a mild one. Temperatures in the south potentially reaching 15 or 16 degrees. Having a look at Monday, another spell of rain will move its way across the country. Either side, there will be some drier and brighter moments, and again, it will